Okay. And good evening, everybody. This is the Maynard Finance Committee meeting for February 27th. We are calling this meeting to order at 7:05. First, let me tell you that this meeting is being recorded, so please take care not to put anything on your screen that you don't want captured by the recording. Also, all votes taken this evening will be done by a roll call vote. And I just need to confirm that all of our members are present and can participate remotely. So I will start with Katie,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Ken,
Yes.
Jillian,
Yes.
and Chief, you're on our agenda tonight, so go with you.
Yes.
And I see you're here, Justin, as well. Thank you so much. You may be off because you're next on the agenda, so Justin may be there but not there. That's fine. Okay, so we're going to get started. I know that Peter cannot make it this evening, and I'm not certain about Khadijah. I hope she was able to figure out how to come on, but we'll just get going and then we'll see how that works. That's our new member, so maybe some growing pains there. So okay, so our first agenda item tonight is a discussion with our police chief Noble, and we had a budget document that I will go ahead and put on the screen. So we're just going to discuss the chief's budget for this year, any questions we may have, any concerns he may have, and that'll be that. So I'll put that up on the screen for everybody. Maybe make it a little bigger. And Chief, I don't know if you want to hit with some highlights, lowlights, and we'll get the discussion rolling and then ask some questions.
If you want, I could just give a quick overview.
Yeah, sure. That'd be great.
So the police, as you know, most people know, 24 hours, 7 days a week. Our shifts run 3 on the midnight, 3 on the day shift, and 4 on what is the 3 to 11, the PM shift. The 3 on the day shift is also supplemented by much of the administration staff, the SRO and the detective, and the community officer. So with that, we have 9 part-time sworn that do details. Because of post, we will be losing 3 of those from the sworn part, but they'll be transferred to civilian traffic enforcement because of their training and everything. They can go to civilian traffic enforcement. But because of post, if you did not work as a law enforcement or do patrol for at least 2,400 hours, and you only had the reserve academy, you had to either go to a full-time academy or you will lose your certification. So they will lose their certification. It won't be disciplinary loss. It'll just be a loss because of lack of the training. But again, they'll be able to do details, and that's what they mostly do anyways. So we go to the capital, usually is just 1 cruiser a year. Less than that. It used to be at least 1 and then 2 every other year. We've tried to get more out of the cars, understanding that that the costs have significantly gone up, and it's difficult for cruisers. For those who don't know, we ordered our last cruiser in August and still haven't received one of them. So it's not finished, but it takes a while because there's a car shortage. There's many. Again, that's usually the only capital budget. We did do the communication systems with the fire over the last couple of years. We've redone that, and our internal and external camera system needed a complete overhaul because that was from 2009 when the station was first built. We did that overhaul this year, but we were able to do it within our budget, normal budget, and it needed to be done because the internal cameras that we need for court purposes, arrests, and the like, they were failing. and because it was a landline, it wasn't Bluetooth, it wasn't that type. It was very hard to repair at times, and it was expensive. Yeah. So we took over the dispatch budget. It just made sense because we supplemented it anyways. We did the hours for them. I did the payroll for them. So it only made sense that we just basically absorb it into ours and create it. It makes it easier for the treasurer's office also, to do it. The biggest, challenges we're going to have is, the police department, every police department, in talking to chief, is recruiting and retention. It's been difficult over the last few years, and then it was difficult anyways, because unlike other jobs, you can't just hire somebody and they stop. Just the hiring process alone takes 3 or 4 months to get somebody, and then if you have to put them through academy, then you got to find an academy, and that's going to take 2 to 3 months to get them into the academy. Then the academy 6 months, and then after they get out of the academy, it's 2 months at least of field training. So you're looking at anywhere from a year to 16 months before you get somebody from start of hiring somebody in this. So, and it's not like you can have a running hiring process. You got to wait till somebody leaves before you can really start hiring. So, there's many factors to why the retirements, the transfers, people getting out of just policing and all of that. My concern over the long term is that this is starting to become significant. Where we're a small town, so we don't have, just like in other departments and other things, we don't have the offerings that others can have. We don't have the significant higher pay. We don't have specialty units, limited advancement and things. So, we're somewhat of a stepping stone at times. Everybody who leaves, it is ironic. Everybody who leaves said, I loved it, I loved working here. I love that, but it's, it's just a sad thing. Historically, we've always been a department that works on an overtime type thing. We have a skeleton force for the amount of calls we go to and how busy they are. We have always filled it with overtime. Up until probably 5-7 years ago, it wasn't an issue because a lot of people like to work overtime and everything. Now people value their time off a lot more. No right or wrong of doing it, but it's just an adjustment that we have to make. And one of those is I've said that in one way to do it is to take money from my overtime budget and put it towards another officer. That way, whenever there's I've been on in Maynard 29 years, and in that time, maybe 3 of these we've had a full staff because it takes longer. And I mean full staff where everybody's working. There's been military commitments, there's been injuries, there's been open shifts, and a lot of reasons. But in that time, there's probably, if you added it all up, 3 years. So it really wouldn't be. I wouldn't be asking for any bump in the budget or anything like that. I think it would just be better equipped to handle when somebody leaves. Because, I had 2 people leave this past week, one to go to the state police and one to go to a town that is paying $18,000 more to start than you. So, yeah, there's nothing I could, and it's about 25 minutes closer to his house. That's another reason that I talked to. They move close. They go to a department closer to where they live because, unlike when I started, Maynard was the affordable town to live in. It's not as easy, and just housing is scarce. I've had officers look for housing around town, and they can't find it. It's just and then what they can find, they can't afford. And one was outbid on 2 houses that they try to put in a bid for. So that's where we are, where we are. The budget this year was deducted, and I said there's a lot of reasons why we're able to keep a flat budget. The restructuring I've done, the try to keep everything in-house in a fiscal, ability that, working with the unions and to try to get it where it won't cost as much for certain things. The staffing shortages, not paying for that. Although when that happens, a lot of times there is a budget shift because you're not paying as much in salary, but you're paying more in expense because you got to re-outfit another officer. And so when you hire that new officer, you got to send them to the academy, cost money. You got to give them all the equipment and everything. And there's newer officers get more for their clothing allowance than officers that have been, in their first year. So that sometimes is a shift of, it's not a complete savings, not paying people. But the problem is it's that never ending cycle where people have a burnout or they don't want to be ordered in because, again, we going back to it's a different mindset. And this is, not just isolated to the policing industry. It's across the board. There's just they value their time. And I wish I had it that way because I was always had to work overtime because then I set my living at that. But they don't do it this way. But again, we're a skeleton force. We have to look towards the future of making sure that we have enough to keep what services we have right now. I'll take any questions if anybody has.
All right, thank you for that. I'll start off a little bit. Do you think, with you were just talking about that one officer that recently left for a higher pay, but also closer to his house. And, there's always going to be that sort of situation. But given the fact that every time we hire, especially an officer that has to go to the academy and we have to pay for that, do you think that if we were able to raise the salaries, that overall it would be a net benefit, as in we would have more retention, we wouldn't be paying so many academy fees, et cetera. So we may still, have a higher budget, but overall, if we could swing it, do you think that really would?
Overall, having a steady workforce saves money because you're not paying for training. I did work it out with the unions and we inserted in the contract that an officer in the academy now gets a flat weekly pay of only $800, which saves about $400 a week for that because they're not sworn yet. They're not doing it's getting paid for that. So they get money, but that used to be they'd have to be paid the same rate as an officer.
Oh.
So that saves money on that end. So sending them to that. But yes, retention is key. It's also because then you have people that learn the town, know the people, and they can offer more services because of their knowledge already. It's like any profession, more experience a lot of times brings a better service.
Right.
It's an industry problem right now. I mean, Boston is accepting lateral transfers. They did that once only because it was the Lowell chief that took over because he wanted to bring some of his own people. But it's the first time they've ever done it in their history because they can't get enough people to apply. So.
Yeah. Okay. Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, so first off, Chief Noble, I want to thank you and please extend our thanks to your officers for their service to our community. I really appreciate what everybody does every day. I want to build a little bit on what Alana was saying, because I'm sure that you've sort of done the assessment here. So she brought up one issue, which I think, it would seem like if we could demonstrate that, increasing salaries or some other means would lead to higher retention, you know, allow us to avoid the academy fees and things like that, we might be able to do that. Have you done or asked somebody to do an assessment along those lines to see if that kind of increase in salaries would lead to that? Or have you seen other communities do that?
It has been shown that, departments that have office that are paid at a higher rate don't leave as often. But, it's not the only factor. There's the Maslow hierarchy of needs. You first have to have that pay that can put there, but then it moves on to other factors. Again, living, that's a big factor too. Because
you mentioned the housing, and I do remember, many, I would say, even 10 years ago, that the town was much more affordable and it was an attraction to people. And I think certainly more recently that's not been that way. The other idea that you brought up was about putting an extra officer and paying for that officer out of the overtime budget. I think that's what you were saying. And I think what you were saying is that you would then have somebody in place when somebody left. You said that virtually every year that you've been in the Maynard Police Force, there's always been somebody leaving. And so there's always been that vacancy. And so having somebody there, first off, you have somebody, that's able to slip in right away. I'm sure it would, well, I shouldn't say I'm sure, I would imagine they would make the rest of the police force happy because they're not having to go through, sort of, I don't know what you call it, forced overtime or something where you've got to pull somebody in, that type of thing. Again, have you done, any sort of analysis on that? I guess also when they get paid overtime, is that at a straight hourly rate, or are they getting paid, a premium on an hourly rate?
they get time and a half.
So,
And
so
depending
again,
on which shift they're, like there's shift differential also.
right, so, but, of course, the shift differential you wouldn't avoid because anybody would do that. But if you had an officer in ready to go in place and you were not having to pay overtime to somebody, then you're paying sort of straight time. Have you done an analysis along that line?
Yeah, that is exactly what I was talking about, in the sense of that if we would have, everybody was here and there's only 22 officers instead of the 21, then the overtime budget would not need to be at all, because you'd have that extra officer to fill any of those shifts. So you wouldn't have to. So you wouldn't have that skeleton shift. So you can factor in how many shifts that would cover. But also, as I said, that's not going to happen that often. And then you're not filling, again, that overtime. You're not paying somebody time and a half. You're just paying them time, their straight time, because you had the extra officer go into that shift, and now you're not filling an open shift.
Well, and if you lose if you have turnover, if you have regular turnover, say, if you were to say that you had one turnover a year, then half the year you would have 22, but the other half of the year you would have only the regular 21, because you're losing somebody at, some point in the year.
It's like a sad thing, but over the last 10 years, we're probably averaging 2.3 or 4, I forget, a year.
Well, so all the more reason then to constantly have that one officer. It gives you the luxury of hiring somebody and perhaps a little bit more relaxed to pace and training them up and so forth, getting them through the academy. And so if you've done this assessment, is this a more recent idea that you've had, or is this something that's been percolating for a number of years? And if where I'm going with this is, have you posed this to, to the select board that that's what you'd like to do?
Yes, I have. I've broached the subject a few times with the town administrator, and he says for me now to start that, because if you
Right.
it's not going to be something that it's, from, he said the same thing. It doesn't sound like it's going to be something that we're going to have 22 very often.
Yeah.
So if
Right.
we have 22, at least we can like start hiring. By the time we finish the hiring process, if somebody has left or this, and then if it does, then it's reevaluate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How it's going.
All right. Thank you.
If you happen to have police officers twiddling their thumbs, you let us know. But it doesn't sound like.
No, we're fairly
I was-
busy for a small little
I was
town.
gonna say, yeah.
And it's, crime has gone down, but calls for service, mental health calls and those things. That's why
Sure.
some of the new programs that we've implemented for that purpose.
Okay. Kevin, go ahead.
Yes. So the benefit, so Maynard does offer a higher level of benefit support than our surrounding towns. Have you found that to be of any hiring advantage whatsoever?
What benefit support do we have that is better than surrounding towns?
The health insurance specifically, we cover, I believe, 75%. Alana
Yeah.
is the correct number.
About.
And I think the average is about 50. So there's like
I know Acton's 80.
Yeah,
I think Concord is 70.
that
So
may be different for, I think, Kevin, we were talking about that in terms of the teachers union. Maybe it's different
it's the same.
between
It's the
civic-
same pool, Alana.
Oh, okay. No, I mean, like, depend what the norm is. If you're a teacher versus a police officer versus a fire, I don't know. That's not my.
Okay. Maybe other towns have. So what I know about Maynard is that every town employee and school employee goes into the same benefit pool. So the
Yes.
benefits, the decision to set the level of support for the benefits rests with the town administrator, not the schools. So the town administrator
correct.
sets the
Absolutely.
benefits policy for the police, the schools, and everything else.
Right. I
Um,
just wasn't sure if, because they're all the union contracts and things, and I don't know if maybe perhaps the police union are used, like if they are used to getting more like the 75, whereas the
Well, I
teachers
think
sometimes
the
get.
point is a comparison was made between
Yeah.
Maynard and surrounding towns. That comparison had been made for the schools. I don't know that that's a valid one for the police
Right.
department.
I haven't heard anybody say that they've come here because our insurance is better than others or our benefits are better than others. But I have people that have told me that they've left because the pay isn't as
The
high.
salaries. Yep.
But so it's the salaries. I also am going off of what Greg said. So remember how Greg said that he's offering higher benefits than the surrounding town as a hiring strategy? That was our last meeting. Greg
Right.
said, I believe he also said that in the joint budget subcommittee. That was a deliberate hiring strategy as part. What I'm
Just
wondering
had
though.
His finger up. Did you want to?
Oh,
Yes, I could just help
Justin,
kind of
sorry.
clarify this as a whole.
Oh,
So
okay.
the pension benefit is across the board for the town. So the 75-25 split is based off of whoever you secure your benefits package, meaning i.e. health, dental, etc. The majority of communities throughout the Commonwealth, especially comps for Maynard, are anywhere between 60 and 75%, upwards of 80. There is only a few communities throughout New England that are as low as 50%. And their retention rate is very, very low.
Hmm.
I will tell you, I came from Marlboro where it was a 70-30 split. There is also the GAC aspect of the state's insurance provider, and that's a 65-35 split. So just know, I can kind of echo the chiefs here as well. Our benefit package isn't extraordinarily outweighing our lack of compensation package.
I mean,
Thank
I'm
you.
also I'm also wondering about like what what are potential applicants really prioritize? Like, do they really value the benefits versus a higher salary? And maybe that's a discussion you have with the unions, but what I'll point out is that if the strategy is to hire officers, but them spending less time, as you point out, like the newer officers prefer more of a shorter level of engagement, more closer to 40 hours than like 80. Those benefits are a fixed cost. And one of the financial consequences of that, by shifting to a shorter hours per employee, that benefits cost gets spread across fewer hours, and thus would result in a higher impact. I think something to consider, especially if we want to go forward with the strategy shift, is to bring our benefits package in line with other towns and use some of that savings to bump our salaries or some other strategy to make our town more attractive. But I think, when we start shifting those smaller hours, that those benefits are going to be a lot more financially painful to act on.
Anybody else on the committee have any questions for the chief?
I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I've seen a lot of talk about Otis the dog. I see a lot of, I think it's a fantastic idea. I'm just wondering, is Otis budgeted? Is Otis in your budget, or is that being paid for via other means?
It's we did the research on it, and it's a very minimal cost, if any, at times. We have fundraisers, the department itself, like the officers, pitch in money. So when it came time, we were supposed to get a dog for free in October. The litter didn't happen, then it was another short litter, then people long line. So we went to another breeder, and it cost $2,800 for Otis. Middlesex Bank gave us a $2,000 startup to start the program. And the offices paid for the other 800, through their donations for No Shave November. And we have that money towards town funds that we give. So right now, Otis we haven't spent any department money on Otis, and we have donated food by Emerson, because if we bring Otis to Emerson once a month, they will pay for his food.
Oh, that's nice.
We've got donated veterinary services. This was when we did the research of getting him. We talked to Acton, we talked to Reading, and a couple other times. They said if you do it, people love to give for animals. It's just it was, and we found that to be very true. It's a very minimal cost that we probably, if it does cost, yes, we will be able to use just our regular operating budget.
I mean, I think if you put it in your budget, I think people would support it anyways, but I'm just
Well,
curious.
exactly, yeah. I don't think we have to, because people are supporting it already. That's
Right.
better way of me putting it, because we did, I went in front of the select board last year and requested a fund, a line fund for donations for the dog program. So we have that set up already.
Good. Wonderful.
I know I saw that there was some chatter about, they didn't budget for it, they didn't do this, yeah, we did our research for it. And again, the donations are because people ask us, oh, how do I donate to it?
Yeah.
How can I, do this? So that's why that was set up.
Hopefully Otis's retention rate will be 100%.
Well, I think everybody's going to be disappointed, because, in 6 months, he's not going to be a puppy anymore, or the little. So. But yeah, he's fun. He just walks up and down the hallway at times. The problem with the puppy is, everybody wants him. So she brings him up to the schools, and then he's wiped out.
Yeah, totally.
He's got to come back and take a nap.
Sure. Absolutely.
So.
He'll have more endurance when he's an adult.
So Madam Chair, I do have another
Sure.
question, if that's okay.
Yep. Go ahead.
So the police cruiser, what have been the consequences of the police cruiser delay?
It's just the shortage of them. I mean, there's, I know the chip shortage, a few years back started the line, but you know, we order them and he goes like, yeah, that won't be, there was a run on Tahoes because I don't know why, but they have, like they said, they have no 2023 Tahoes left. And not that you know, I was just talking to, I've known him for 20 plus years, the guy we go through. And he goes, there's just a run on them. Yeah, they went up $8,000 from last year to this year, the hybrids.
Wow.
$8,000 in 1 year. You know, and I think they're gouging, but you know,
But
I can't prove.
I mean,
Yeah.
specifically on your department, what has been the impact of not having those new cruisers on your department specifically?
What do you mean not having them?
So, I mean, the cruisers were delayed. So are you just using what?
Oh, I mean, sometimes they're in the shop for a longer period of time. That means we're using, you know, other ones, or we have to use the admin vehicles, which the admin vehicles we want to last anywhere from 6 to 8 years. You know, we'd want that because that turnover. We have 5 line cars, so buying a line car every year, and then, you know, I've talked to Laurie about, you know, the possibility of leasing the admin cars or doing something to where to offset what the costs are, to how to save money. Because like I said, we used to put in a budget request of 2 cars every other year. So not waiting for a car just means that we're learning to order them earlier. You know,
I
right
mean,
at the beginning of the fiscal year, once they pass, that's when we're ordering them.
Do you have officers that have been forced to be on foot patrol because of the lack of a vehicle, or have you been able to make do?
No, not forced on foot patrol. I mean, years back when we had to do 2-man cars, but the officers choose to go on foot. I mean, they're actually encouraged to go more out on foot patrol. So that actually, you know, saves mileage on the cars. But that's the problem with the cars. They don't get highway mileage. They don't get that they start stop the whole day, and that puts way more wear and tear on them. Plus, they're not garaged. You know, I know somebody at one point compared like, oh, the fire department. I go, well, theirs go to calls and then go back, and then they sit in a garage and not weatherized, you know, which is weatherized, which makes it last a lot longer.
So,
Okay.
so this is why you requested a hybrid, because ideally, like the hybrid puts, when you're using electric, it has less load on the mechanical.
I mean,
And
I'd
the
have to
gas.
ask the town mechanic on that more, but the hybrids, we haven't had them long enough
Okay.
to see if they're gonna last longer.
Mhm.
You know, Justin, yeah, you could
Yeah,
probably answer
Justin's
that,
got
but
something to say about that.
Yeah, just so the FinCom is aware that the town mechanic falls under the DPW, and we assist with repairs and maintenance of all police cruisers and small fire apparatus, all DPW vehicles and school vehicles. So, you know, just kind of to add to the impact to Chief Noble, operation is what he described, but I will tell you the impact of not turning around these vehicles impacts the DPW. One, it impacts Chief Noble's budget by increasing the repair maintenance requirements, but it also decreases and increases my staff's downtime and dedication towards police cruisers, which can be utilized in other aspects. So our town mechanic can be utilized for many aspects, including work outside of the repair shop. But due to the nature of the equipment and the lack of turnover, their time is 100% dedicated within the repair shop. That inhibits allowance for us to take that staff member out and do more work in the field, i.e. a catch basin repair, pothole repairs, things of that nature. So there is a major impact, but that impact is spread through multiple departments. And then to go with the hybrid, Chief Noble is not wrong. There is a gouging of the market. That happens when federal funding and state funding is funneled to one specific method, i.e. sustainability in all electric systems. So what ends up happening is there's only a couple of state procurement contracts that allow for equipment purchasing, either Fords, GMC, Chevys, you name it, they're still fall under 1 or 2 procurement contracts. And what ends up happening is the Department of Energy Resources is now funding through grant processes the electrification of certain equipment, specifically police cruisers. And when that happens, then the capitalistic market takes that money and just applies it. So really, it's just funding the increased value of a gouging situation. I know that we as department heads have been asked to explore more sustainable options, EV vehicles, hybrid vehicles, things of that nature, to satisfy other stakeholders of the community. And it is weighed upon in all of our decisions. You know, I don't want to say how Chief comes across his decisions, but I will tell you that those things come across the DPW in many ways, in the facilities as well. And we weigh them both from a financial standpoint and a feasibility of mechanical, you know, reliability standpoint in the industry.
Thank you. All right. I think we are probably pretty good with the chief at this point. We can move on. We've got several other things on our agenda tonight. So I just want to say thanks, Chief, for that presentation and for talking with us. And we look forward to seeing you around town and seeing Otis, and wish your department all the best.
Yeah, Otis is first in line for everybody, so.
Thanks.
Okay,
For-
thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. Have
Thank
a
you
good
so
night.
much. Have a good night. All right, so moving on in our agenda, we are going to do a budget discussion with the DPW director, and also while we have him here, we will do a reserve fund transfer request with him. So, Justin, do you want me to share the spreadsheet you showed us, or is there anything particular you want to start with?
I feel like I missed the buck on the templated finance committee department head.
No, that's, you know what, and I don't think I sent it to the chief, and I think the fire chief, and I think I did not send it to you this year, so that was
I
probably
won't
my bad.
necessarily 100% hold you hostage. This is my 4th year here, and I do remember after I saw Chief Nobles that there was a template that was sent out. If you want, I don't mind if you want to ask those questions deliberately, I can answer them. If the FinCom would like that, just to stay in conformity with what your approach is. And then we could refer to the Excel file with details if you want, because that's just a platform we used
Sure.
as the budgeting platform changed from our traditional software accounting system to ClearGov, which doesn't allow us to look at what the TA recommended line item budgets are. So we had to transform and transpire our own Excel file to kind of keep track of it.
Sure. Yeah, we'll kind of go through it. So to start off, I guess maybe talk a little bit about your staffing, what's changed, new, dropped, addition, subtraction, kind of start there.
Sure. I can echo a lot of the same aspects of what Chief Noble is going through, but this is, really a public sector industry issue. Compensation factors are very low. Benefits packages are very low compared to private industry. And as a public employee for over 20 years, we have always contended with you go to the line of public employment because you typically have an ultra-realistic view set and you want to help said communities, town, state, etc. But typically your benefits package outweighed the potential compensation from the private industry. Well, private industry is now at a situation where benefits packages are outweighing private sector benefit packages. Their compensation levels have always been at least 50% higher in equivalent positions. And we have survived as a public sector on that premise. Unfortunately, what we're seeing now is we're seeing that there is not a large pool of employment opportunities, or let's just say kind of a back pool of resources, employees who are looking to join the public sector. And when they do, they are cherry picking communities who are being very proactive in their approaches. Ones who are positioning themselves with compensation levels far above what the town of Maynard is. I can use several examples of situations that I'm contending with as we speak, specifically the water and sewer industry, which is a highly technical industry in regards to staff. And we're seeing communities change their collective bargaining agreements to reflect 20-25% increases over compensation just to acquire staff to run their utilities. Remember, these utilities are highly regulated and they have a potential issue when it comes to public health. So that is the first industry that's really being targeted in the DPW. But I will also kind of relay some information that the town of Maynard is seeing. We've had an open position within our highway department for over a year and a half. And we've posted it several times at top steps. So I'm allowed to bypass the low steps all the way to the top steps, which would be our max pay for somebody onboarding in that position. And we've received 3 applicants, and those applicants, you know, wouldn't even fill a part-time role in a position that is 10 times what we're looking for, 10 times reduction of what we're looking for. We're asking a lot in the public sector, highly licensed, highly educated, highly experienced individuals at a compensation level package that is just not competitive. We've survived in the public sector for a very long time when you had a situation where you had employees grow up in a community and took pride in it, and they would go and they would apply to jobs within that community. We're no longer seeing that. Maynard's DPW is made up of almost 80% of Maynard residents who grew up here, second, third generation public works employees. And what we're seeing is once they retire, we can't backfill them. We're not competing with the compensation package, and we're not competing even with the benefits package. So at this point, what we're having to do is we're having to adapt our requirements and our job descriptions and our expectation levels. What we're looking for within the public works isn't what we were acquiring 10, 20 years ago. This is not uncommon throughout the Commonwealth, but unfortunately other communities are being proactive in adjusting to that, prioritizing their employment stature versus others. We're seeing that that is a harder situation within the town of Maynard because we're well aware that there's financial constraints across the board. We're struggling because we have isolated services. You have isolated schools, you're not regionalized. We have isolated wastewater treatment facility. We have isolated water treatment facilities, you name it. We can go back to the micro-urban situation that Maynard contends with all the time, but those pressures are hitting a lot of avenues, and they're now starting to hit employment retention as an alternative issue. So it is one that we contend with. How you can contend with that is the cultural aspect of operations. So we try to support our staff and their needs within a budget that we can control. We're also trying to support our staff's needs through other aspects, cultural bonding, team approach, things of that nature, reminders of the importance of what these employees are doing for the town of Maynard and supporting that. And we're able to contend a little bit with that situation as a whole, but I do not foresee us at this pace at a 2% COLA for union contracts being able to contend in the next 5 to 10 years with backfilling our positions as they start to retire. So that is always an issue. I wouldn't say that's an issue for the DPW right this second. It's a very minor issue for the DPW right this second, as we have 21 full-time employees, and we're talking about not being able to retain a new full-time employee. We'll continue to explore strategies to try to backfill that position. We may change the job description, and what will most likely end up happening is we'll just have a less technical staff and the ability to provide in-house operational services at a trades perspective will probably continue to decline. And those who have been, members of Maynard for 20, 30 years as residents have probably already seen this transition. They don't realize it, but they have seen the in-house operational services decline based on our staffing levels, abilities, and what we're retaining. So that's definitely a high level issue. But for FY24, what the DPW is really contending with is the current inflation market. So for the town of Maynard, the Department of Public Works is the highest department budget that does not solely fund salaries. So we fund a very high level of materials and commodity market aspects of our line item budget. So every time asphalt goes up at a 10% inflation market and our budget only goes up 2% or is flatlined, then we're actually taking a 10% reduction in how much asphalt we can put out on the roads. So when and this is always the crux of the public sector, when there's a tight squeeze, you don't typically lay off staff. You typically look at your line item budgets that can be reduced without, major impact. And it always falls in the DPW. But this continued pace will continue to degrade our assets, continue to degrade our infrastructure, and continue to add long-term costs in the future, either through bonding or free cash allocation towards infrastructure outside of proactivity, meaning a reactive approach to our infrastructure. That being said, I can tell you that our capital requests in FY24 were 3.5 million, only because I didn't ask for 57 million. I could ask for 150 million. I could put together 500 capital requests at $150 million without blinking an eye. But I'm also a realistic person, and we're planning for 5-10 years down the line. And implementation of our capital assets is efficiently and effectively managed and strategized and reviewed, not only on an annual basis, but on a quarterly basis by me and some of my management staff. And we focus on the absolute needs that will continue to allow Maynard to limp by for the foreseeable future. That being said, the budget message that we're receiving takes a hard hit on the DPW, as there are significant contract increases that may be reflective in the TA's recommended budget as an increase to the DPW. But I will tell you, almost 50 to 65,000 of that 75,000 is strictly towards solid waste contract needs. So that's not a hard reflection. And I did request this of Lori, and Lori was fantastic on this. In this year's budget, I asked to have the solid waste removed under the premise of the highway budget. I thought it was a misrepresentation of what the highways budget was actually going forward with and what it was actually capable of doing. And it's a misrepresentation of funds. The solid waste budget is $750,000 to $1 million per year. And that needs to truly be transparent and understanding what the cost of those services are. And they can't be wrapped in or hidden within the highway department. You know how many phone calls I receive saying, you have millions of dollars in your highway department. Why can't you fix my road? When that's a complete inaccuracy. We have a $50,000 general maintenance line in our highway department to do road work. It costs, every time I fill up our hot box, it costs me almost $3,000 to $5,000. And a hot box is 1 day filling potholes. So it doesn't go far. We do the best we can. We're also willing to, adjust on the fly. This is traditional of DPWs throughout the Commonwealth. We know we typically take the squeeze when it comes to budget reduction or budget flat lines. With that being said, that doesn't mean we don't ask for things for improvements. We don't try to request line item increases that we believe are high priority. When it comes to staffing, the DPW has a huge middle management gap. The DPW in the town of Maynard is your full service DPW shop. If you compared us to other communities, we'd be comparable to cities, not towns. We provide water, sewer, trash, full highway, full cemetery, full parks, full athletic fields, you name it. We provide it all. Everything a DPW would normally provide. And we also have the umbrella of the facilities department under us. With that being said, we do not have a full-time town engineer. We do not have a full-time operations manager. We do not have a full-time business manager. And we are lacking in those areas within our middle management. That makes it very hard for us to be very proactive or to use strategies to help make our operations more efficient. We're very reactive because of that nature. That being said, Justin DeMarco, the DPW director, fills all those roles. And we backfill some of those roles through consultants, but those consultants are very expensive, $200 an hour. So we only prioritize what is absolutely needed from that individual to perform said work when the time is right. So without a full-time town engineer, the DPW director is acting as that. Without an operations manager, the DPW director is acting as that. Without a business manager, the DPW director is acting as that. We spread the wealth the best we can. And I will tell you that I'm very proud of our staff. We do a lot with a little, but we have a lot of stakeholders and a lot of residents who are looking for more within our department, who ask for more within our department. Part of it's more of an educational piece where we have to take the time to truly explain how process works and that it's not always the DPW's responsibility for X versus Y. But the DPW in the town of Maynard also supports a number of departments across Maynard. As you heard me talk about, we have the sole town mechanic who supports both the fire department, the police department, and the schools. And under our Parks and Cemetery Division, we also support maintenance on the school's athletic fields. And prior to our recent MOU, we supported a significant amount of facilities work throughout the schools. We have made some progress with the onboarding of a full-time facilities manager for the schools a couple of years ago, which has allowed the town's facility staff to refocus on town facilities and kind of getting ourselves back up to steam throughout the community. But there's still significant progress that needs to be made across the board when it comes to staffing levels and allowance for us to be in a more proactive approach as opposed to reactive.
Okay, can I ask you a question or two about staffing before we
Mhm.
move on from this topic? Because I think that'd probably just be easier than trying to go through everything and then come back. So the consulting on your proposed FY24 budget, I believe I'm looking at the right line. The
What-
consulting services.
Do you mind bringing it up and I can kind of explain our
Yeah,
process?
absolutely. Because
Yeah.
my question, let me share it. My question is, so this is what I'm looking at here, and this,
That's
million.
wastewater treatment. So
That's wastewater treatment.
That's
Okay, so
our-
that's,
Yep. That's our biggest service contract in the town of Maynard. And that is to operate the wastewater treatment facility. So technically a 5-person staff that meets all the requirements of DEP operating the wastewater treatment facility is a hired service. That is not town employees.
these are
So
not town
tech-
employees.
Yeah,
Okay,
technically, I oversee that contract and I administer the operations. So it is still the town of Maynard's facilities. We sub out the contract services to operate that facility. So if
And
you
is
go
there-
into the admin role, you'll hear, I can describe the town engineer.
well, that was sort of my question, is I was wondering if any of the additional people that you're looking for could,
Yep.
offset some of those consulting.
So when we do this on SoftWrite prior, it was much easier to run a couple of reports. On this one, we had to kind of do it on the fly, but I can explain the theory behind it. So in FY24 submitted budget versus FY23's budget, you'll notice there is a town engineer and operations manager, a business manager. Those are all new in FY24 is because those are requests. That doesn't mean they're going to be fulfilled, but those are technically what the industry standard is for compensation at a comparable DPW the size of Maynard's and what our job description would require. So the $118,000 would help supplant the $140,000 if you go down to DPW admin professional services and contracts, right? It's in that, it's 17, row 17.
Oh, okay, yep.
So $140,000, pretty much 90% of that pays for VHB, Wayne Amico. I'm not sure if some of the FinCom knows that Wayne Amico is our paid consultant town engineer. He provides 8 hours of in-house service a week. And VHB also works on a number of design plans under the umbrella of the DPW, not water and sewer. So compartmentalize the two. This is a civil engineer, roads, bridges,
Okay.
traffic controls, etc. So what ends up happening here, part of the reason that wouldn't fully supplant that is you're talking about onboarding a town engineer without any cultural historic knowledge of Maynard. There will be an onboarding process, and that will come as a phased approach. So you will never lose the 140,000 as a whole. You will potentially offset it. You could have a 50% reduction depending on what we acquire for a town engineer and their skill set level. So that is a situation where you have to pay up front to have long-term reduction in cost or more of a plateau in cost. What you'll see there is not necessarily a financial delta gain. What you'll see there is more staffing hours to support the service requirements that the community is asking for. You would have a 40-hour-a-week full-time employee at $118,000 compared to an 8-hour a week part-time consultant at $250 an hour within the $140,000 budget line.
Are there other consulting? So I mentioned the one on the wastewater. Is there other
We rely
places
heavily
at which
on
we're paying
consultants.
consultants that we could potentially
Yep.
be paying employees?
No, yes and no.
Okay.
So the reason that a town engineer is a very technical position, but it is a general overview civil engineer, meaning that they deal with the minutia of an everyday civil engineer. So they're a traditional PE, and within it, they're not a technical advanced PE. So when you're talking about water and sewer utilities, they are civil engineers with a technical exceedance level focused on specifically sewer, specifically water. So it's very detail oriented, and we wouldn't have enough time requirements to house a 40-hour onboarded technical PE for water only.
Okay.
So I will tell you that under our water and sewer utilities, so if you put water, sewer, wastewater treatment plant, you'll see that each enterprise fund actually has an engineering consultant line, and that is balanced between technical experts based on the need within that fiscal year. So if there's a reliance heavily on, I don't know how many of you remember that there is a lead exceedance issue that our utility is contending with based on some policy changes. You receive letters that there may or may not be lead within your service lines, things of that nature. So that requires a special expertise consultant that will onboard utilizing that funds for the immediate reactionary approach of a policy change. So when we're talking about a town engineer, that town engineer would not supplant any water, sewer, wastewater. It would supplant a significant amount of DPW operational requests.
I'm gonna go ahead and let Kevin ask his question.
So yes, is that town engineer included in the town administrator's suggested budget?
So based on the town administrator's message, now I don't have the ability, because we switched platforms from ClearGov to SoftWrite, to know line item by line item what the town administrator's budget request is. But based on the message that I saw that was also presented to FinCom on Saturdays, is that no full-time employees under the request of the DPW were fulfilled under the TA's recommended budget.
Do you happen to know, Justin, the percentage increase of your 2024 to 2023?
Not off the top of my head, I believe it was $75,000 total, but I don't know what.
No, I know what the increase is in your TA budget. I'm wondering what the increase was in your requested over 2023.
So if you break, it's hard. So if you go back to my Excel, because ClearGov, once a department head puts our budget into ClearGov, it then moves on, and I can no longer look at it. So I'm assuming Lori may be able to pull that out based off of what my requests were versus what the TAs are, but I don't
I was
have
just
to
wondering approximately what your percentage increase was versus what the TA budget percentage increase is for the DPW, just overall.
So if you go to my Excel file, we did put in the calculations for the percentage increase. So
Oh, okay.
if we were awarded everything that the DPW asked, that would be, you would have to combine all of those increase totals. So if you pulled it up again, you would see it under the admin role, and every tab has their own. So under the admin role, if the TA were to approve a town engineer, an operating manager, business manager, and the increase.
Right, that's a large
in
increase.
line
'cause
items,
that's-
you'd see a
right.
49% increase only in the admin line. And then you'd have to put those together every tab.
Okay. We'd have to figure that out.
But I mean, we can go tab by tab if you want. I have no problem going line item by line item. But the overall premise is that I believe the TA has not approved any staff requests from the
Okay.
DPW for FY24. And all of the increases are solely based on contractual obligations, such as solid waste contract, union contract increases, and any commodity increases. Another example of our budget is we house the petroleum, which you'll see is a reserve fund request. We house the petroleum for the entire community. So meaning fire, police, DPW, schools, that is all housed under the DPW. Actually, I believe it's under our facilities.
Okay. I think let's move on to talking about capital needs for the DPW. That would have been one of the sort of hot question items on that sheet. So where is that represented? Is it each tab sort of has its own for capital, or how do you
No,
organize capital needs?
What I can do is there's another templated model that the Capcom requests.
Oh yeah, right.
And they're singular PDF files. And I believe I produced about 25 to 30 in FY24.
Okay.
So what we can do is, if I'm not sure if FinCom has lined up this conversation with Capcom, or you guys have joint meetings, I'm not really sure what your approach is. I know Capcom is somewhat still new to the town of Maynard as a committee. What I can do is I can follow up with our FY24 requests. I can send them to you, Alana, and you can distribute them. I have no
Sure.
problem having another conversation. But like I said, in regards to capital, we submit annually a capital request form, and the DPW traditionally submits about 90 to 95% of the town of Maynard's capital requests on a yearly basis. This is an uncommon based on the fact that the facilities also falls under the DPW. For FY24, there is roughly anywhere between $3 to $5 million worth of requests. I believe that we'll be lucky to fulfill, I think, based off of the TA's recommended budget and what I saw from Capcom, is we're looking at anywhere between $300 to $500,000 of free cash allocation towards DPW or facilities requests. And just remember, facilities requests are no longer from the schools, are coming from the DPW. So when there's a facility issue at either high school, Fowler, or Green Meadow, and when I say facility, think of the envelope, the building itself. Those requests are coming from the school committee. Outside of that, Tiger Drive, parking lot, things of that nature, that would still come from the DPW.
Okay, is there any capital item for the DPW department itself, like for your operations, that you are particularly concerned about, or that is well beyond its life, that you've maybe submitted more than one time and it's a real problem?
I will tell you, there is a lot of significant issues, but one that is a philosophical or theoretical approach is the lack of continual funding for roads, sidewalk infrastructure on a regular basis. Whether it's a theoretical approach of 5% of free cash, a policy that just dedicates funding towards that approach. We're very reactionary in that approach. We rely heavily on grants. That grants dictate location, specs, things of that nature. Just remember our complete streets.
Right.
A lot of stakeholders were not happy with it, yet that's a tiered system that was put in place 5 years ago, and we have to abide by grants. You know, you could have the same argument that you're hearing now with MSBA and the Green Meadow School. When we rely heavily on other financial authorities, we're also trapped by their criteria and their controls in use, which sometimes bothers stakeholders. Localized funding is not as controlled, it's not as concise. We work with ourselves, our stakeholders, select board, FinCom, Capcom. We identify projects that our stakeholders see as a higher priority versus how the state or a third-party authority sees it. Having a continued financial structure to support pedestrian sidewalks and road degradation would help loosen the operational requirements from our highway department. Right now,
and just for everyone at home, so we normally rely only on, is it chapter 90?
Chapter 90,
So
which is $265,000 a year.
Right.
We are lucky to pave 1 to 3 roads a year with that process. And we have provided.
So you're looking to add a line item, have a in place, sort of like how we have been talking about adding a capital line item somewhere in the budget. You would like to have a road repair line item.
It's one that doesn't need to be funded yearly either. It can be built up. So the beauty with Chapter 90 is one of the best programs that the state ever put in place, because it actually allows the community to have almost 90% control over the funding as opposed to some of the newer style grants. But Chapter 90 can sit and build and attack larger scale infrastructure projects, or it can be used annually. Unfortunately, in the town of Maynard, because we don't prioritize localized funding. It's needed to be used annually to keep up with our pavement degradation. But no matter what, we have presented to the select board significant amount of times, 5-year forecast, that our degradation window for our pavement management is going downwards. We're on a downward trend. We're not keeping up. Our roads are degrading faster than we're repairing them. That holds true. And if we don't continually start to support that from localized funding, our roads are actually going to continue to get worse. So it's always this premise of I pay more taxes. Why is the results going backwards? Well, the results are going backwards when inflation's 10% and we're line item on our budget and we're not supporting infrastructure improvement outside of $265,000, which is clearly not meeting our needs.
Any questions for Justin on sort of capital items or things of that nature in his department, in his budget? Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, Justin, I want to thank you and thank your department for all that you do for the town. I know it's a lot of hard work and often very it's you don't get the thanks that you deserve, and you're pressed to do a lot of things on shoestring budget, at least in my opinion. So I want to pull on a thread that you started to talk about here, which is around the funding of infrastructure. You said, taking a look at capital projects that you almost could, throw out any number and it's not going to be, it's not going to be something that would be able to be funded. I guess, one of the challenges that I think we have as a town is that by refusing to pay the bills now for infrastructure, we defer these bills off to somebody else. Somebody at some point is going to end up paying for them. And so we're, essentially, again, if you take a look at the household budget, if you don't repair a roof, eventually, you're going to have to pay for that roof. You could, if, I guess, for a lack of a better analogy, if as a parent, I'm going to bequeath my house to my children. If I don't pay for the roof, I'm really only deferring that cost off to my children. So one of the challenges I think that the town has is because of the numbers that are involved. And it's easy for somebody to sit there and go, well, Justin just could throw any number out there and it's, and we're not going to be able to fund it. But I think, on some level, at some point, we have to sort of sit there and say, enough is enough. We have to be realistic about the amount of money that we're not putting in. To your point, costs are increasing 10%, and you're only increasing the budget line item by 2.5%. So I'm going somewhere with this, which is, if the town were to come to the finance committee and say, okay, you guys keep talking about, doing an override. How much money would it take to get serious about roads, to get serious about well, let's leave water and sewer off since that's a enterprise fund, but let's just take roads, for example. How much money would you say a community our size needs on an annual basis in order to maintain its roads in a good state of repair? And I'm not saying pristine, new, and so forth. I'm just saying we all go around the town, we all see the potholes, we all see the cracks in the road. If we were to sit there and say, in order for the town to fix its road, keep them in a good state of repair, it would require X amount. What would that amount be? Have we done an analysis on that?
Yes, and it's been presented. So it's referred to as a PCI index. So a pavement management index is an index where there is a line between pavement where it is repairable at a nominal cost versus going over that threshold and becoming a replaceable item at a significant cost. And that line is anywhere between 65 and 75. Our current payment index is below 50. And we have presented what the next 5 years of funding would be to start to take that decline, make it an incline, and reach our PCI index over the next 5 years, meaning just get to that index. And that would be $1 to $1.5 million annually, specifically only for roadways. This does not include sidewalk repairs. This is strictly asphalt roadways. This does not include line painting, things of that nature. It does not include water and sewer replacement. It does not include
Right.
stormwater replacement. It
So,
is either a mill and overlay
right.
or a reclaim, what you saw recently at Old Marlborough Road.
Okay, so if we don't pay that $1 million, then in X number of years, and I would imagine that's a pretty short interval, you're not going to be paying $1 to $1.5 million in order to do that work. You're going to be paying 3 times that or some factor.
So Ken, Mass DOT just put out the inflationary index for certain materials in regards to transportation infrastructure. You know, it's very easy, you know, when you're talking about federal government or policy, it's a 10% inflationary factor across the board. That's just kind of put it in average. So, you know, residents truly understand the impact, but that is actually a commodity variation. Asphalt index have risen 33 to 35%. Portland cement has risen almost 60%. The building materials market has risen almost 35%. So yeah, your milk might have only went up 5%, but when you put all those factors together, that equates to that 10%. But the significant volatility in the market is actually within the materials construction market. And if this continues to move in that direction, we're talking about trying to keep up with the 33, 35% inflationary factor, specifically just for roads. That's asphalt. So that index model that we presented last year is going to be represented. All the numbers will be calculated based off today's known information. And that 1 to 1.5 could already turn into 1.75 tomorrow once we put that data together.
But
So
I'm saying,
why
but my
you-
point, Justin, my point is if you put that 1 to 1.5 off, let's say 3 years, okay, then what is the cost to do that work? Not only an inflationary cost, but the fact that now you're having to do much more work. In other words, it's
Right.
not paving, you're having to do a significant amount of work. What is that factor over, and I'm just using 3 years. If you want to use a different factor of 5 years or something like that. What I'm saying is, when somebody says, well, if we pay $1 million, that's going to increase our taxes. My response would be, if you don't pay that $1 million, it's going to increase your taxes a whole lot more.
So we present our annual pavement management plan and our recommendations once per year, sometimes twice per year. I can send you the PowerPoint presentation that was presented to the select board with the 3 and 5 year outlook of our projection.
No,
when we gave the recommendation.
and I would appreciate if you'd send us that. But what I'm saying is if town meeting voters come to the FinCom and say, I don't want to pay this $1 million because I don't have that money. My point is, you can't avoid paying that $1 million. 3 years from now, you're going to be paying that $1 million. In fact, you're probably going to be paying a lot more, not only because of inflation, but because of the increased damage to roads. And so my question to you, and I'm just saying ballpark it. If I defer paying the $1 to $1.5 million for 3 years, what does that expense become 3 years later? Is that
So we have to do that
$3 million?
analysis.
Is that $5 million?
It's based variable yearly. So it's, again, it's based off of market value. So it's a commodity, which is the asphalt. It's labor costs, it's fuel costs.
But you also made the point that if you don't keep the road in a good state of repair, not only, you're not just deferring the repair, but the repair later on is a more intensive repair.
Correct.
Okay, so my point is just ballpark it for me. If I
So-
sit there and I say, I don't want to pay that $1 million this year, 3 years from now, yes, there are increased costs, but there is a more intense repair that I have to do 3 years later.
So I'll
Okay.
give you an example. So last fall, well, this fall that just took place, Great Road, we paved Great Road towards the Sudbury line to the intersection by Alumni Field. The technique was referred to as mill and overlay, where they only remove the top coat and they repave it. That cost is about a third compared to a reclaim process. A reclaim process is exactly what we did this fall, the same time on Old Marlboro Road. So any of you who've driven over Old Marlboro Road, they grind down the top coat, they grind down the base coat, then they have to regrade the gravel pack underneath, and then they pave the base coat and the top coat. When the trigger factors for that, again, there's 3 models to look at when you're talking about pavement index. You have natural degradation and repair techniques that can lengthen the life of the asphalt top coat. That's your crack sealing, that rubberized strip you see within the cracks. There is also a chip sealing, which Stowe just recently did on Great Road, where you saw this like large amount of asphalt spread all over the road and these little pea stones added to it. That's a chip seal technique. Those things come at a nominal cost to extend the life of your asphalt. Your milling and overlay is your more common approach to degradation, which is a cost factor less than 3 times a reclaim. So reclaim is a situation that we run into quite often in Maynard. Typically, we reclaim 2 to 1 roads because we're that far degraded. And a reclaim is most likely headed for Fletcher, Allen, Heights Terrace, these roads that are 1, unaccepted, and 2, have gotten to a point beyond reproach and repair. There's a significant amount of reclaim roads within the town of Maynard, but if we only focused on reclaiming only the reclaim roads, we're again exponentially spending our limited funding and not addressing minor repairs and strengthening life. So it's a healthy balance, but you're not wrong, Ken. If we continue to allow degradation, we're a cost factor of 2 to 3 times the
Sure.
potential upfront costs.
So the technique that was used at Great Road and 27, did you say?
So yeah,
That-
so it's
that's called what again?
mill and overlay.
Mill and overlay. Okay, thank you. So what is the difference in time between a mill and overlay versus a reclaim? Is it 3 years?
In terms of when a mill and overlay becomes a reclaim?
Correct, exactly right.
There's factors to that. So it's based on a number of variables: use, location.
Sure. Is it
but
3 years? Is
typically-
it 5 years?
What-
Is it 12 years?
Every road's different. So it depends. What ends up happening, what triggers a reclaim is when the top coat has degraded so far gone that the base grade starts to degrade. So when you have those crater potholes, you're talking about base grade degradation where water infiltrates the gravel pack base, and then that starts to shift the asphalt. It's a layered process.
Oh,
So
I know
when you start
exactly what
moving
you're
it-
saying.
But
McKinley,
there's not a
McKinley Street is
specific-
that way.
Yeah, there's too many factors to influence that. Degradation of asphalt comes in many ways.
No, I understand, but you know, where I'm trying to get to here, Justin, is the fact that you don't save money by putting these costs off indefinitely. And it's not just an inflationary fact, it's a fact that you said a reclaim, the difference between a mill and overlay versus a reclaim is a factor of 3.
Yes,
And then you add into that the inflationary factor of 10, maybe 30% from year on in. I just think it's irresponsible for us to be putting this off every year and pretending that we can, pretending that we can ignore it. So I'll stop asking the question. I think you've helped me make the point. I would
Yep.
be interested in seeing the report the latest report. I've seen a previous version, but it'd be nice to see the latest one. Thank you.
Yep, no worries.
All right. Any other questions? I think we were sort of talking about like capital items and things like that. Are there other
I will kind
questions?
of hit on some high level points though. So Ken did
Sure.
make a point compartmentalizing out water and sewer versus,
Mhm.
DPW assets. I will
Right.
tell you that they shouldn't always be interchangeable or compartmentalized out. So the significant factor holding back the potential revenue increase for the town of Maynard as a business, meaning new growth, taxation, the number one trigger holding this community back is the ability to produce clean, drinkable public water and the ability to support new growth. Now, every community stakeholders may look at this different, and that's an argument for other committees to have with FinCom, et cetera, on what the vision of Maynard should or shouldn't be. That's not up for a town department head to put in place. But in order for you to gain revenue source and new growth and things of that ability to potentially pay for the continuation of city style services, the number one infrastructure constraint is the ability to produce clean drinking water. Now, that doesn't need to solely come on the back of the enterprise funds and the user rates. I will tell you, you can easily make this argument that it could be subsidized by bonding through general taxation because our utility supports 98 to 99% of the residents. That's more than our solid waste supports, and our solid waste subsidizes general taxation for its program.
Right.
So I do have some questions regarding the water.
Sure. go ahead.
So first off, what capital items did you request for the water infrastructure for this coming fiscal year?
So when we do capital requests, it's a little different than Capcom doesn't necessarily 100% follow our requests, is because a number of those can be paid for through enterprise funds.
Okay.
And are kind of done strategically through our rate increases, our operating budget, and strategically to follow our 4-phase capital improvement water capacity plan. This fiscal cycle for FY24 is very nominal with our capital request because we're already in it. Meaning we've already acquired our borrowing capacity and are in the process of onboarding our brand new well source and implementing our treatment plant upgrades. Because of that, we have to pay for that. We bonded that. We technically right now we banded it. We used ARPA funds to subsidize a portion of it. We've banded and borrowed the first aspect, and we've just received our $5 million borrowing authorization at last annual town meeting. And as we go through the process, we'll band through that. But that being said, we have to account for that through our user rates without completely impacting your bills as users. So we do this in a very methodical financial approach where we do not have peaks and valleys in our rate increases. We do it over the course of 5 years. So for FY24, it's actually not a significant amount of water and sewer infrastructure requests because we have to support the cost of all the borrowing. Meaning you will protect the select board. I plan on presenting our FY24 water and sewer rates on March 7th and eventually March 21st for adoption. We are lucky that we've been so proactive in our business model and financial approach with our enterprise funds that we are anticipating a 7% increase for water and a 4% increase for sewer. When combined, you're talking about a 5 to 5.5% increase. And that's in contrast to a 10% inflationary increase. A number of the line items paid for underwater and sewer commodity items, chemicals for production, petroleum, diesel, propane, all these aspects of, think of mechanics just constantly working. We were able to curb that because we've been so good proactively with our finances. And we've also prepared ourselves for debt fall off and debt add-on, meaning we had a number of bonds kind of meet their end, have fallen off, and we've subsidized that fall off with our new borrowing. We've done this in a very methodical approach, which has been able to reduce large amounts of increases to our water and sewer bills. But to answer your point, Calvin, for FY24, there's not a significant ask. But if you were to ask me today, if I had $100 million, what would I do with it? I would fund Old Marlboro Road in a heartbeat and get us 1 million to 1.5 million gallons a day of treatable water. And then I would say, all right, every committee, go nuts. What do you want Maynard to look like? There's not anything holding us back at this point.
So there's nothing that's holding back Old Marlboro Road.
Well, there's always financial, permitting, things of that nature.
But I
But if
mean,
you were to wave your magic wand and say, okay, like, let's just say Ken's premise of if we were to bond or borrow, or if we were trying to do overrides or things of that nature to fund infrastructure so we don't kick the can, you know, anywhere between 50 and 60 million dollars needs to fund Old Marlboro Road's treatment plant. And even if I got that money today, that's a 5 to 6 year window before it even onboards. But moving that process forward does potentially save you money now compared to the long term. That would be the highest priority. That's always the highest priority in the DPW. But we work very strategically within our enterprise funds to kind of build to that. So we've been financially building to that too, meaning we put money aside in a line item that starts to carry and builds. So that we're anticipating what that bond cost is. So when I request potentially a 50 or $60 million bond, we're not asking for the ratepayers to pay for it the next year. They would already have been financially building it into their operating budget.
So let's just assume we have buy-in for Old Marlboro Road. I presume you're able to bond inside the enterprise fund. Is that
100%?
so? What's the difference between bonding inside the enterprise fund and charging a residents via water rates versus bonding in the general fund and having our residents pay through their real estate taxes?
So funding it through the enterprise fund 100% hits your water and sewer bills only. Bonding it through general taxation affects your tax rate. You could potentially subsidize some of that through funding mechanisms out of the enterprise fund, but you can support a phased in bonding approach where you subsidize half, a third through general fund and the other half or 2/3 through enterprise funds. You could also appropriate free cash to start to pay for things that we're potentially bonding up front, such as permitting, design, all of those aspects. So in Maynard, we've had success in the 4 years I've been here with projects when we target multiple buckets of money. A collaborative approach is the only way to get our mid-tier projects through to completion. Let's take the bleachers, for instance. So one, we don't have support under free cash. It's not a large enough appropriation to fund a brand new bleacher system. So we've had success with if we utilize CPC funding and they approve. We utilize free cash. We potentially piggyback a smaller bonding scenario. These are the approaches that we've had success in the town of Maynard, and that's not typical throughout the Commonwealth. It's very easy to just say, okay, we have a problem. Let's efficiently get to that solution and then just bond for it. But we don't have that ability. We play that juggle game because we're always contending with how high the tax rate is and what those implications are on our residents. And we contend with how high our water and sewer bill rates are and what that impact is on our residents. And it is a healthy balance. Collaboration throughout the committees, throughout all the stakeholders, and a unified effort is the best course of action for the town of Maynard.
Well, there's also some consideration to be given in terms of things like our tax ceiling and where the money, you know, when you're talking about using enterprise fund bonding versus putting it on our tax rate for the, you know, the town as a whole. That's where you can also either run into a problem or run into a solution, because the enterprise fund, and Lori can answer if I'm incorrect, but has different, you know, that's a different scenario and it doesn't add to our levy ceiling.
Correct. And so perfect example is if we weren't contending with the ability to build a new school, let's just say there wasn't a large scale debt in front of us on the general fund aspect of it, we could have the larger conversation of supporting the water treatment plant through a combination of funds. But unfortunately, we're contending with the school that the town share may be anywhere between 40 and $60 million. And that's a large lift for the town of Maynard. That's a very large. Even with the fall off from Fowler, that's a very large lift. And we're already contending with high rates. Your tax rate is high. We're contending with, city services not being reduced or eliminated. So those cost triggers are still costly. They're adding to the wants category versus the needs category. But if you're not willing to get rid of those, then it does fall solely on the enterprise fund. And at that point, how does the enterprise fund support it? And the way for us to support that is a length of time. So instead of resolving it in 3 to 5 to 7 years, we're planning on 10, 15 years because we have to financially build ourselves into it. And hopefully along that 15 years, we don't run into major issues that require some of that funding to be reallocated. I will tell you, over the past 4 years of planning for Old Marlborough Road, we ran into a major issue bidding for a treatment plant 4. We ran into COVID and the 10 to 30, 40% construction factor. So we had to borrow $5 million extra to handle that phase 1 project. And you can't necessarily predict over 5-10 years that you're not going to have some volatility in the market. Doesn't mean we won't get there. It's just how long it's going to take to get there.
Right.
So what are the blockers that prevent you from funding Old Marlborough Road solely by raising water rates? What are the key blockers that are
You're
preventing you from
talking
doing that?
about supporting a $50 to $60 million project. That's not including soft costs up front. Soft costs up front could be anywhere between $2 and $5 million. And when I say soft costs, I'm talking about permitting, piloting, conceptual design, and preliminary design. And then you're talking about the $50 to $60 million. You would see rates go up 75% over what you're paying now if we did that tomorrow. We can't do that. That would be the highest water and sewer utility in the entire Commonwealth, and we would most likely drive out every resident in the town. So we have to do that incrementally over time. If you notice, over the past 4 years in my position, the water and sewer utility rates have gone up beyond inflation, except for FY24's request on purpose. This is how we financially buffer for the long term. If we compete above inflation, then we're building our financial buffer for the long-term project, which is Old Marlborough Road. But again, we hit divots along the way. We can't request a 20% user rate increase when we're about to ask for $50 to $60 million school with an impact of anywhere between $800 to $1,500 on a resident. At the same time, they're going to hit $200-300 extra a quarter in water and sewer. We have to be kind to our residents, and there is those factors, and they're always being weighed against each other and in support of each other.
But
Right.
I think part of the appeal of the Old Marlborough Road is that we would be able to approve housing, we'd be able to get more residents in, the costs would be spread across future residents. I think there's an opportunity to growth hack this, unless there's a legal requirement that you have to raise rates commensurate to a bond that you anticipate coming in. But I mean, bonds take a few years for the first payment to come in.
A year or two. If we're banning a $50-60 million bond, that's a huge risk. So you're talking about a potential year or two. But again, you're bonding on the anticipation that a volunteer board will approve the rates to support it. Bond council doesn't love that. They want to know that you have the revenue potential to support the payment of that debt and interest. That is significant when you're talking about a $50 and $60 million bond. And we do not have the revenue without approval from the select board in advance. So this is the issue of contention. It's not a guarantee that the select board will approve a $50 or $75 rate increase. I'm not going to lie. If I were a volunteer select board member, I wouldn't approve that. And I'm in the industry. That's a significant blow or a significant impact to costs on our residents. The spreading out method is the appropriate method to ease back into it. Unfortunately, we're playing catch up for 50 years of infrastructure and 20 years at one point where rates weren't even increased. So take the 20-year factor. Middlesex County averages 3 to 4% inflation over the past 20 years. And that's how far backwards we're working from. And
Justin, does
that
old,
is-
would Old Marlboro get us to a place where we would potentially sell water?
Not necessarily sell water. So I will tell you this. Sudbury does not need Maynard water and they are water rich. And
Right.
they're also not willing to give us water. Acton is in the same situation as the town of Maynard, where they actually have water capacity issues as well. So doesn't Concord. There is currently an issue with their source water and the legality aspects of ownership and what they're withdrawing versus not. Kind of a White's Pond situation,
Mhm.
but they're in a newer situation with that. I will tell you that the Middlesex area and specifically right outside the 128 belt is contending heavily with water capacity withdrawal issues. So in this factor, you can compare Maynard to Acton and Concord, only in this factor. I will tell you that this has become a higher level conversation about regionalization.
Hmm.
And that regionalization factor is pushed towards the legislative body of the state. And the solution potentially would be the MWRA, Massachusetts Water Resource Authority, which is the
Quabbin one?
Yep, that's the
Okay.
utility that provides Boston and a significant amount of cities along the along the Mass Pike corridor and the Route 2 corridor. One of our issues is where we're not close to an aquifer. We're not close to a ductwork. They have excess water capacity in the 20 to 40 million 20 to 40 million gallons a day of excess water they can produce. It's the distribution infrastructure to support communities. There is a conversation swelling, and there's a conversation swelling about 3 locations regionally that the MWRA is exploring. One is the Metro West corridor, which we fall into. Another one is the North Shore corridor, and another one is the South Shore / Cape corridor. Now, what I'm being told in the industry is MWRA is only going to explore one of these opportunities because all 3 of those regions pretty much eat up the capacity that they have. Our region has been a huge advocate. Kate Hogan has been a huge advocate. Jamie has been a huge advocate, and a number of our DPW / water superintendents have continued to engage with MWRA, but it's not a guarantee. So we'll move continually on our plan, and as that MWRA study progresses, we'll be apprised to it. We're involved in it, and if that presents itself as a solution, a more efficient, effective solution, then it's one that will be presented to the community as a whole. I have high hopes. I come from Marlboro where we were fed with MWRA water.
Yeah.
There is some pros and cons to that. The pros is you have unlimited water. Marlboro grows exponentially. There was never a capacity issue. The con is you have no control over the rates. The MWRA controls the rates. We are still in control of our distribution assets, meaning our water and sewer staff would still have to be onboarded because we're in control of our distribution network. We just wouldn't potentially produce water. There is the factor that we could potentially half produce water, meaning using our assets and subsidize the water
Right.
requirements of the MWRA. There's multiple
Almost like
opportunities.
solar.
Yep. Oh,
We
yeah.
pull-
It's
We
not uncommon.
subsidize. Yep, sure.
Exactly. It's shared resources.
Okay,
We've
so that's
eliminated the shared resources.
one option for like a regionalization thing.
Mhm.
But sort of the one I was thinking of is if Acton and Concord also are having some issues, is there any way to share the load of something like, and maybe it's not Old Marlboro, but something like Old Marlboro
So
with another town?
Acton is building a 1 million gallon a day plant, and that's like their well 4A, just to
Okay.
catch them up with today's demand. Part of the issue with sharing distribution networks, there's a number of scientific issues, but understand that their water is different than our water. Not
Mhm.
all public water is exactly apples to apples. There's variations in water quality. We all have to meet the industry standards, but some may be heavy in certain minerals where others aren't, et cetera. Acton has PFAS beyond our exceedance limits. We are isolated. Our PFAS levels are below industry standards. We are in good shape when it comes to that. That may change in the future, but for us, we do not produce PFAS in our drinking water like other communities. Acton is above that exceedance. If we open the gate, we now have
We're
PFAS in our
mixing.
system. And that can happen in multiple ways. You know, we have heavy permanganate that we use to treat organics where they do not. There's a blending scenario that becomes very complex. That is one which, again, even using MWRA becomes an issue. So it's isolated systems
Okay,
within our system.
So there's always mixing. It wouldn't be like, we'll build at Old Marlboro and Acton will pay a third of it because we're gonna just give them a third of the water. It doesn't work like that.
Not the way our system is built. Our system actually backfeeds. So there is some systems, Alon, I know this is very technical, where the treatment plant sucks the water out of the ground or the surface and pipes it up to a tank, and then the tank disperses it to the distribution system. That's a very expensive distribution system and was never Maynard's MO because, again, even back then they didn't have a lot of money. What happens with our system is we have 3 treatment plants. They pump the water and they backfeed our pipes, pushing the water up to the tank, which then pushes the gravity back down. So ours is a completely blended system and we don't have that ability to just pump directly to the set.
Okay. We could talk about infrastructure and DPW fund all night, I'm sure. But we do have a couple other things that we need to get to, one of which being the reserve fund transfer from
Alana,
Justin's
Can I
department.
request just 15 more
Yep.
minutes of Justin's time and we can end it at 10? Because I did have
and
some specific
And
questions.
his at 9, you mean? But yeah,
And his, can we agree
Sure.
to end his at 9 and then get to the other items? But I do have some specific questions for Justin.
sure. Go ahead.
But especially in the spirit of like what we had with the police, where they were asked
Yep.
like cost saving opportunities.
Mhm.
So let me ask you first, Justin, have you identified any potential cost saving opportunities in your department?
Yeah, I mean, we review strategy all the time when we're talking about becoming more efficient in processes to help reduce costs or curb costs. Reducing costs is very hard. Reducing costs for DPW means removal of services. So we can explore the removal of solid waste as a programmatic option for the town of Maynard, which could potentially save, 500 to 600,000, but that hasn't been entertained, even by the task force or community stakeholders so far. The options have been provided for multiple different programmatic options, including the removal of a town-wide service. Most of the DPW's cost reductions would come at the forefront of reducing services. We can't remove water and sewer. We can continue to reduce our staff, which would continue to reduce what we provide for services in the field. But to Ken's point, all that would do is just push the can down the road for repairs and maintenance. We would have to subcontract out at an exponential rate and move that process forward. So we're actually going backwards when it comes to that. What we should be doing and looking forward to, which is our approach, why I'm looking to onboard multiple middle management staff, is to become more in-house reliant, which would reduce our costs overall of contracting services out. Just, a simple comparison is our principal engineering consultant is $250 an hour, where a traditional in-house staff engineer is anywhere between $50 and $75 an hour. That's very simplistic in nature, but the same thing applies when you're talking about labor and service contracts. So when you're talking about what we pay for highway staff, now you did hear me at the beginning talk about how our compensation level is far below our competitors, and I'm not talking the private industry, I'm talking about other DPWs in the public sector. But traditionally, anywhere between $30 and $35 an hour supports a solid in-house operation for DPW, compared to a prevailing wage cost of anywhere between $50 and $75 an hour for contract services. So we rely heavily on contract services because there is the premise of you also don't pay for benefits. But let's add benefits to the $35 an hour. Do you think benefits are another $35 an hour, making that 70? I don't believe so. So it is always one where it is the hard line of supporting in-house staff, full-time staff, and bringing back services internally, because it comes with onboarding, training, reliance on equipment. So it'd be reinvestment in equipment that is aging or we don't have, things of that nature. It's a long game when you're talking about DPWs, but successful DPWs, specifically city DPWs, have brought back a large amount of in-house services, have invested in equipment to reduce long-term operating costs. The town of Maynard could do that strategically. Now, we couldn't support a full in-house operation like some larger cities do, but we could definitely support a better blend of what we're doing now. We're 75% reliant on contracts and services of repairs and maintenance, improvements of our infrastructure compared to 25% in-house availability. So part of that is moving forward with slowly acquiring the full-time staff as we've identified in our middle management, which will then allow us to really look at an in-house aspect and a control mechanism. I don't have the ability to be in the field assisting, monitoring, educating, training our in-house staff because unfortunately I am stuck somewhere else. Without that gap, our staff is just what our staff can do. Meaning sometimes we can do things, sometimes we can't. And if we can't, it gets pushed back because it's either a capital request at that point because our operating budget can't handle it, or it's a 1 to 3 times a year contract service and a prioritized method to handle the immediate threat for the community.
So let's talk about solid waste a sec. So you presented in March the option to convert our solid waste program into a enterprise fund. So my first question is what would be the sticker charges if we were to convert to a enterprise fund, or the effective sticker charge? Like how much would it cost for 32-gallon barrels versus and 64-gallon barrels if we were to do that conversion to an enterprise fund? Let's assume the automated, what you proposed in March with the automated cart solution.
So part of it depends on some variable factors. The presentation that we presented was based on the sheer fact of covering the expenditures. It did not cover the upfront capital costs of onboarding, meaning acquiring bins that were town-owned versus wrapping them into a service contract.
What would that capital cost be?
It depends on the customer base. So these are aspects that will work out through the solid waste task force. But at the time, we used the factor of 4,200 customers. And I believe, I don't have the PowerPoint in front of me, but the analytical analysis at the time had a price point margin that we identified. But again, that was carrying a contract that has since increased and an expenditure cost on the commodities that has since increased. But it would be adjusted. I will tell you the benefits of the enterprise fund would be to remove the reliance of that general fund allocation under the DPW operating budget to be reallocated as this committee and the select board see fit, or not reallocated at all and just reabsorbed back into the tax rate. But it would shift the burden to another bill. So the premise of adding cost or reducing cost is one that's not under the programmatic option per se. It's at the fact of the select board, FinCom, school committee, reducing their operating costs or not trying to reabsorb that operating costs. Because what has scared some is that even if we move to an enterprise fund and capture 100% of the solid waste costs under a user fee, what ends up happening with the $500,000 to $750,000 that was formerly in the DPW's operating budget?
Well, I would just
Just
point out,
get reallocated somewhere else, and then you are adding a cost.
well, I would just point out we
Right.
could pay for the town engineer and we could probably save $50,000 with the town engineer. We could invest it in the roads. I mean, it's not necessarily just going down a hole. But how much of the general fund would we relieve by converting to an enterprise fund?
So I believe I sent you the financial model that we did at 2 meetings ago. Do you have that available, Gavin?
Yeah, so I saw like roughly $610,000. Does that jive with what your understanding?
That's anticipated with the information that we had at hand.
Okay.
Those revenues could have changed, as explained before. When we get revenues for the pay-as-you-throw program, the service providers of the stickers, i.e. Russell's, Market Basket, etc., they buy in variation models. So it's not a consistent, hey, every month they buy X amount of stickers. So based on the information we had at the time, that was the revenue projection, and those are the known expenditures. Now, the known expenditures are also one that's a variable. There is 2 commodities. So one, we pay for tonnage and tipping that we don't necessarily fully control, meaning in our program's current nature, a resident can put out 57 bags 1 week at a cost of $2 a sticker, and the other aspect of it subsidized through general taxation. There's no control in regards to how much solid waste, and that solid waste, the actual tonnage, the amount, the weight is paid for separately outside the service contract. The same goes for recycling. Prior to our new contract, and this is evident throughout the Commonwealth, recycling commodities through the global market used to have a value. Now that value has changed. We can't get rid of or reuse the recyclables fast enough in the global market. Now they have a cost. Some are still a red positive and some are still a black. So, and that varies on a monthly scale. Pretty much it varies weekly, but how we're billed, it varies on a monthly scale. And those triggers, without historic knowledge from Maynard, have to be conservative, and that's what we provided with that analysis as well.
All right. So let me put you through the same analysis that Ken did with the roads. So we have the stickers where the guy has to get out, drive his truck, get out of the truck, check that the stickers are on the bag, throw the bag in the truck, versus the automated cart where the guy could just stay in the truck, drive his truck up, move the arm, grab the barrel, toss it in, and go. So it seems to me, just from the labor cost alone, there's significant savings to be had by converting to an automated cart. Do you have some numbers of like how much savings is there to be had from switching from a sticker and bag program that has to be manually tossed in to an automated cart system that can be automated and potentially result in savings of both labor costs and in gas costs and in carbon emissions?
So the cost proposals received when we developed the PowerPoint presentation from E.L. Harvey included both programmatic options, the pay-as-you-throw program as you see right now, and an automated cart system. At that time, we did not have a known identified local fund to support what would traditionally be anywhere between $200,000 to $300,000 to buy enough bins for everybody. That was wrapped into the contract, but the delta difference between the two were the same, except for the cost of the carts. Now, the only reason that you could say it's the same is because E.L. Harvey was upfronting the cost of the carts and wanted to make sure they covered their costs over a length of a contract. If the town were to cover the upfront costs of the carts and own the carts, we would have a stronger control over the service contract costs, specifically just the truck labor costs of somebody like E.L. Harvey Republic Waste Management. Again, in the town of Maynard, we rely heavily on putting our burden onto contracts and consultants, which drive up the cost. But this is always a factor that is hard for Maynard to overcome, is putting up front capital to help reduce operating costs or to curb operating costs. It's hard for stakeholders to see that vision come to fruition because we have such tight budgets, including such tight appropriations of free cash towards infrastructure.
Right.
We could get
So-
all of that analysis and it will be
One last
worked through in
one-
the current task force.
One last question, Madam Chair.
Okay, one.
Okay.
Go.
So your sticker revenues, what were your projected sticker revenues for this fiscal year versus your actuals so far? Let's do year to date.
So again, if you could pull up the Excel sheet, we can go through it right
Okay.
now.
Kevin, while you look for that,
right.
I'm just going to ask a question of Justin. How long do you think is reasonable between the time at which, so right, going from the program we have now, the pay as you throw, in which people have stickers sitting in their cupboards, et cetera, et cetera. How long between when we decide we want to go a different direction to when we implement it in order to make that transition, I don't know the word, palatable or doable for the average, Maynard household?
So one, it's highly dependent on if we move to an enterprise fund or not. If we move to an enterprise fund, one, you need to have that accounted for under a town meeting vote. And then DOR would have to approve it, and we'd have to upfront fund it. So we would have to
Okay.
potentially transfer stabilization funds or some other alternative source to upfront the cost of the proposed contract and anything that falls within that enterprise funds criteria. So that being said, that would depend, that'd be highly dependent on the length of time to implement the control article adoption for enterprise funds, et cetera.
Okay.
If we
Madam Chair.
didn't do that, and we just stayed with the subsidized situation where we had
Yep.
barrel stickers, which can be done as well, then
Okay.
that programmatic change would be as fast as either, let's just say we, i.e. went with carts. So
Okay.
your recycling carts for solid waste, as fast as they can be procured, an RFP process could take anywhere between 2 to 3 months. Contract language could be defined in about a month. And onboarding of the program would hopefully align with the end of a contract. So typically your June 30th timelines, when we've positioned ourselves with our current EL Harvey contract to be a 1-year contract with 2 1-year extensions to allow us flexibility to get out of the contract in a simplistic manner, meaning you're not wrapped into a 5-year contract and you're trying to breach it. So if we're the ones breaching contract, we would have to have proof of why. That sometimes becomes a legal and muddy issue, but we've designed ourselves and positioned ourselves so that if the task force currently right now can develop a program that's adopted, that we could potentially implement said program next July 1st. But then again, that's contingent upon a lot of variables. That means we would have to have a known enterprise funding obligation that we would have positioned by next May, so that we can position ourselves for that July 1st with a large amount of upfront funding identified either through stabilization or other alternative means. So free cash appropriation next fiscal cycle that's dedicated to funding the upfront
Right.
programmatic change. And then we're talking about from this point, pretty much July 1st, but it needs to start now, which is why the task force is working now.
But you mean July 1st, not July 2023, you mean July 2024?
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Just want to be sure everybody understood.
And unfortunately, in this town, committees work very slow. There is contentious, biased, and contentious ideas that without an overall consensus, there's no buy-in. Without buy-in, there's no implementation.
Okay. Kevin, move ahead with
Yep.
the spreadsheet you have, and then we need to
I
wrap
need
up.
permission to share, Madam Chair.
Oh, sorry. See if you can share now.
Okay. So yeah, the numbers I have is that so I believe your actuals were 494, Justin, 494,000.
Yep, those are actuals. So
Those are-
2021 is an actual, 2022 is an actual. So our projected model was to see a reduction in revenue from stickers based on the fact that we have removed services from our solid waste program. We no longer are allowed to pick up mattresses. That is a
Right.
DEP mandate, which you're talking about an item that potentially typically had a $14 sticker on it. The exponential cost to remove it was anywhere between $40 and $60, and we charge 14. But you have to understand that the revenue from those mattresses does equate to the $14 sticker. That also includes the removal of bulky waste items. So couches, tables, large scale items, again at $14 sticker prices. So what you're seeing is, excuse me, we did anticipate either a curbing, a flat line, or a reduction in our sticker revenue. But we saw a bigger reduction in our tonnage fee in our anticipation based on the fact that bulky items and mattresses per unit were costing anywhere between $65 and $75 to get rid of. And we were charging $14, meaning that delta was being provided for by general taxation. We have reduced the expenditure on those tonnage unit items, but we're also going to see a potential revenue decrease. Now, I will say that, I have had conversations with Lori on this as well, is what ends up happening sometimes is a perfect example. As you see line 26, in 2021, that was $63,460. And in 2022, that was $27,560. That happens to fall on a calendar year flip over. So there's a potential that Market Basket, or i.e. another vendor, came in 2 weeks after the close of that and purchased $30,000 worth of stickers that could be easily put back onto that revenue source or vice versa on this analysis. So I will tell you, I'm sure Lori has more updated sticker revenue monthly indications, but I haven't received them or requested them at this point because they fluctuate and I only really need per year accommodations to move in my programmatic assumptions.
Let's talk about your projection for a sec. Did you project sticker revenues being $570,000 for FY 2024?
No, we knew we would see either a flat line or a semi reduction in our revenue on stickers based on the fact that we no longer picked up mattresses and bulky waste items.
I think that needs to be brought to the town administrator's attention because the presentation of the budget subcommittee had a projected sticker revenue of $570,000. And I think we're setting ourselves up for some sort of shortfall if we continue with that projection without updating it with these updated numbers.
So I can't
Greg
speak.
and I went over that today. In fact, Greg and I went over local receipts. I sent out a sheet to Alana earlier today, showing where we sit as of January 31st for all local receipts. Greg and I spent this morning going over where we're at this year, what was projected for 24, and we are making changes.
All right.
Thank you, Lori.
That is very encouraging. Thank you, Lori, for that update.
You're welcome.
Gavin, I will
Okay.
tell you, like I said, I can't speak for Greg and his processes when it comes to that. But it is well known that I requested budget transfers and amendments to the contract, knowing that'd be a rising cost. That's why you see amended FY23 of 150,000. At one point, I asked for an additional 200 to 300,000. I don't always get what I asked for, but our anticipation was to be conservative so that we wouldn't be reliant on reserve fund transfers for the change in the contract. So that being said, though, a lot of this is assumptions because we don't have historic knowledge of recycling commodities because we've never had to pay for them. And we haven't seen a giant programmatic change in leaps such as the removal of mattresses and bulky waste. But it is anticipated and should have been anticipated that our sticker revenue would be reduced when we no longer allow for services.
Okay.
I will just point out that since we do see a reduction in sticker revenue, I do believe we have eligibility for stabilization funds to try to stabilize our trash program by various means.
Okay. Let us move on. Thank you for all of that, Justin, and don't go anywhere just yet because we need to discuss the reserve fund transfer that you had requested. So I will go ahead and share that. And I do believe this I did send this around, I hope, to the whole committee. It is up on board docs, but pretty sure it was forwarded. So do you want to talk briefly about this, Justin? It's a pretty straightforward ask, but just give us some of the background.
Yeah, so about 3 years ago, we centralized the petroleum line item under the facilities department. Prior to that, it was there was petroleum line items in every department. But just for understanding's sake, there's only one fuel petroleum diesel tank in the entire community is housed in the highway garage at the DPW. And typically most communities have one central line item to be representative of what the overall use of petroleum is. So that being said, also this, we have a contract through the state blanket contract. So this is a commodity that fluctuates. It is procured through the state procurement process. So we are getting the lowest rate possible for a situation like this. Without historic knowledge from the police, fire, COA, and the schools, it is hard to predict what the overall use of their operations is going to require. The DPW uses probably less than 33% of this line item. It is mostly used by the police and fire as they're moving their operations, far more than the DPW is. So the $50,000 is to fund the budget gap that is predicted at this rate of what the petroleum is being used under the FY23 model. $50,000 should get us to next fiscal cycle. And we have requested a significant increase in FY24 of petroleum costs to cover what the state contract is and what the anticipated operational use is. But just know that we can't anticipate how many more calls the fire department and police department will get from Maynard Crossing. These are all results of just, I do want to remind everybody that sometimes building as a community doesn't come without ripple effect repercussions to the operating budget. This is an example of increased call volume. This is an example of police having to respond more, fire having to respond more, and us having to do research into what the response rates are moving forward. And there's still building going on in Maynard Crossing. So those numbers could continue to increase. So when you see new growth and when you see the potential opportunity for new taxes, you really have to understand that setting a portion of it aside and not spending it as fast as it comes in is one that you have to have proactively financially structured to handle the repercussions or ripple effects that you typically come 3 to 5 to 7 years after a new facility, mixed use, large scale operation, housing, commercial, etc., demands on a community. We're starting to see those repercussions in the water and sewer system now. Yes, we were able to acquire some MassWorks funding for the collection system, but that didn't address any of the water consumption use. The $7 million that we're bonding for 4A, that's 100% Maynard Crossing. Without Maynard Crossing as a customer, they're paying a portion of it as a water user, but they're not paying the bulk of that. The bulk of that's being spread out throughout the customer base. This is an example of a situation where we're seeing a repercussion and increased call volume for the police and fire.
So when we centralized all the petroleum to the DPW, was there an increase in the budget at that time, or?
So we requested an increase to the budget, and at that time, the finance director wanted to see how it would play out because they wanted more accuracy and information. So they were heavily reliant on reactionary approaches to the budget as opposed to anticipatory conservative measures. And that, you can philosophically say that both methods have pros and cons to them. At the time, reserve funds weren't being used as heavy. Now we're relying on reserve funds more. So conservatively budgeting might be a better approach.
And how much of this, obviously, as you said, we have more calls. We have been using our equipment and the petroleum more, but we've also seen it's coming back down a bit now, although diesel I feel like is still quite expensive. I'm not sure what the breakdown is of what you guys use, but how much of this is just the inflation change versus the amount of gallons change? Does that make sense?
Yes. So because we're under a contract, inflationary measures are procured into it. So you're not seeing a 10% driver in the contract price change. They have a commodity market driver. So there is an increase, but a majority of this is due to call volume increase or equipment use increase.
Okay.
There is a percentage of that is increased to inflationary commodity pricing, but we have a controlled pricing through the state contract.
Okay.
When I say controlled, it's not a fixed price, but it's a controlled commodity riser.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the committee on this reserve fund transfer? Okay, then I will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the reserve fund transfer.
I will
Okay.
second to approve the reserve and transfer.
All right. Any further discussion? Then I will do a roll call vote. Ken,
Yes.
Katie,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
and Jillian?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. All right, Lori, I will sign that and bring it to your office. And with that, I think, Justin, thank you so much for your time tonight and the discussion. Always so informative and such a pleasure. We learn a lot. Wish we had the magic wands to wave, but it's always good to hear about the challenges and how we're moving forward. So thank you for that. More discussion on the trash situation, I'm sure, and the water sewer system. So
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it, Alana. And as always, I know that unfortunately, it seems like we only meet once a year, but just know as a committee, as you want to start to have philosophical conversations on the financial constraints of certain services or programs, that I am willing to come to future FinCom meetings, specifically with agenda items to address those or to learn more about them. I have no problem providing some of that information as well, but I do
Thank you.
encourage. I know that some of you are a liaison to the select board meeting, but really bringing that information back. We provide a lot of information to the select board on a number of questions like Ken Cavan has had in place to the select board for consideration, and just making sure that that information gets relayed across the board. But if you don't have
absolutely.
it,
I will be happy to provide it.
Also, quick question. Are you preparing articles for ATM? Okay, so
Yes.
we
Don't kill
may
me.
be asking you back shortly then, once we see them, if we have some
I have
questions.
about 8 articles I just dropped on Greg today because I'm
Oh,
really behind a
Justin!
lot of deadlines. I have a lot of deadlines right now.
You're killing me.
So you're gonna have a whole lot of Justin control.
All right,
articles.
so
I will tell you, 6 of them are common control articles.
Okay. All right.
A couple of them are just, maybe a quick conversation. But no,
Okay.
yes, please, once the control articles are in place, bring me back.
I'll get you. Yeah, I'll get you back
It's
on our
easy to
agenda
just do an
before
hour
we.
or two and go
Yeah.
through all of it as a whole.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Have a good night. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. We will move on to our discussion with the planning board chair. Chris, thank you for being here and your patience while we get to you. We really appreciate having you. So I asked Chris to come here to speak about some of the draft control articles that we have that are being presented through the planning board. We're sort of doing dual work here. We're in the middle of budget season, talking with department heads. We are also preparing for annual town meeting, and we need to do our voting and recommendations on all the articles. So Chris is here tonight to help us get started. And I believe, and I'll bring them up as we go, that Chris, it's C, D, E, and F for you all right now. I'm pretty sure.
I don't, thank you, Alana, for having me. I don't have the
I'm gonna
full
share.
warrant in front of me. That could be correct.
We just got the articles sort of lettered recently, so I will. I'll start with this one. Let me see if I make that a little bigger. So this is amend section 3.1.2, business uses for body art establishments. And do you want to go ahead and just start us off on the discussion about? I noticed because there's a theme here about body art.
Just give me 1 second because that's not looking correct to me.
Oh, okay. Well, that would be good to know.
I have it as 3.1.2. Maybe it's correct.
Well, we've got the definitions one, right?
Yes, I have it as 3.2.
Oh,
I just want to make sure that the warrant was issued
oh, that it
correctly.
has,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
correct.
Exactly. Sorry. I can take a look at that afterwards.
Okay, sure. Make
yeah,
sure it's
so-
the right number.
So we really have basically three categories of bylaws that we're looking to amend. First is, as you said, categorically body art establishments. And I think there should be 3 or so amendments to this. So one is actually 3 point. Okay, so I'm thinking I'm seeing this now. So this is 3.1.2, the table.
Yeah.
So to start, the language in the zoning bylaws for body art establishments is kind of old school thinking. It carved out body art to be something that could potentially be kind of nefarious, and it really wanted to put a lot of restrictions on it. And so we just want to remove all of the, the zoning around it that we find is inappropriately treated. And what we're looking to do is to treat it more like a hair salon or a nail salon or something, that's more mainstream. Because before, and I can show you the language, but before it was called out specifically. So it required a specific set of criteria. And there are some restrictions on it that we just don't find relevant anymore. And I think this was at the time probably when body art was first becoming allowed in Massachusetts a few decades ago. So there's
Right.
probably some general concern about something new. So, but we've had years and decades of body art experience. So I think I'm very comfortable, my board's very comfortable pulling back that to make it more like a nail salon operation. So 3.1.2 is the table, which just changes the zoning, basically the zoning under different districts. So what we're changing here is that if you see the crossed out in the table, it shows PB is crossed out and put a Y. That means basically we're saying in the business district, before the current zoning would require a planning board special permit in the business district, and we're just saying it's allowed in the business district. Same thing with a central business district. It wasn't allowed in the central business district, and now we're just saying it's allowed, an allowed use in the central business district. And the same thing for the HCI. HCI is the healthcare. I forget what I stands for right now. Healthcare. Maybe Ken, maybe you might remember.
Yeah, healthcare.
Healthcare industrial?
Industrial.
That's
Okay, thank you.
the mill.
That's the mill in
central
Maine.
mill.
Yes, yeah. So we're saying it's allowed there too. And that's the change here. There's a few more accompanying changes.
Okay.
And
this changing it to a Y,
Mhm.
just for everyone's knowledge and my own, they are still subject to any normal business permitting and, what have you process.
Mhm.
So it's not as if one of these establishments would suddenly just be there tomorrow because we put this Y in, is what I'm saying.
So with the way we were looking at this, you're correct in the broader sense. Body art is a highly regulated industry by the state of Massachusetts. The Board of Health is heavily involved in it. So yes, there are plenty of other entities that are regulating that industry. All planning board does and all our zoning was doing was saying where it's allowed and not allowed. And so we want the downtown to be generally allowed in the business and central business districts. We just think that is just good zoning.
And why did you choose to keep planning board in the I, which is industrial.
Oh,
I assume, right?
there's the industrial district is a little bit more removed, or the industrial
Okay.
zones in town a little bit more removed from, say, downtown. And there's many reasons why I prefer the planning board to still have some control over that
Mhm.
development. One is that some of that's connected to the Powder Mill corridor, and we just
Mhm.
want to have some very thoughtful development for any future industrial
Mhm.
zoned areas.
Well, so
Or-
that's why I'm a little surprised because the zoning along the Powder Mill Road is also business. And so the difference is that if it's N, it's not allowed at all.
Mhm.
If it's Y, it's allowed by right, which means that somebody owns or leases a building, then they have a right to do it. Now, Chris is absolutely right. Body art is highly regulated from a health perspective. But when these were put in originally, there was some concern about how many body art establishments would go in and what kind of reputation that might give. I think, most people have, again, to Chris's point, have sort of evolved in their thinking about this. From a finance committee perspective, basically what this is just doing is this is allowing town meeting voters to decide what zones that they would want to have this go in. Now, from a finance committee perspective, I think what we need to do and what would be beneficial is clarifying where the business and industrial zones are. I think most
Okay.
people understand the central business district is the downtown and HCI is the mill. But
Right.
Chris is absolutely right. There are some outlying zones that are properties that are zoned industrial, which having the planning board go through a special permitting process then gives an opportunity for additional scrutiny through that special permitting. And so again, I think my point here is, I think Chris is absolutely right. Our thinking on this has evolved, but from our role
Mhm.
of helping town meeting voters understand what they're voting for, I think we need to provide some clarity as to where the business and industrial zones are. Now, that
Sure.
can happen in the course of a public hearing. It could also happen in the course of our of our comments.
Right.
That's really, I think, where we need to focus
Yeah, that's a
our
good point.
attention. I think, again, I agree with Chris that I think, when we put this into place, there was a lot of concern about, and probably not an unreasonable concern for the time, but certainly things have evolved.
Yeah, it was unknown at the
Right.
time, and there's
Sure.
that's fine, but we have the times, it's 2023, and
Right. And I also feel like, as you say, this is not a new industry anymore. And at the
Mhm.
time it probably was. And so that right there, the market for this is much more stable and known and understood. It's not a sudden,
Yeah.
explode. I don't expect a sudden explosion of body
No.
art coming, because it's, it's a very long running established market at this point.
right. And
Kevin, I saw your hand up. Do you have a question? I can't hear you.
Yeah, so I was wondering if we could actually include the zoning map in the warrant article. Maybe a black and white version.
what I can do, I will be providing a presentation during town meeting, mostly for one of the other articles that we're proposing, but I can definitely include a town map in that presentation.
Yeah, that would be helpful. And I think, as Ken pointed out, maybe when we have our public hearing about this article, or these articles, we can show as well where the zoning is on the map, so people can understand better.
I mean, I will also point out, just for the point of discussion, that we have a very high commercial vacancy rate in Maynard. And I don't think it's going to be huge, but I do think like making it easier to set up a body art shop in Maynard could have a positive impact on our commercial tax revenue. Not huge,
Sure, right.
but it might be a little bit, every little bit
sure.
helps.
Sure.
Well,
Are there
I
any
think-
other?
I
Oh,
think,
sorry,
I
go ahead.
think part of the issue here is that it's very easy for people to sit there and say, I don't want to one of these establishments setting up next door to me. And there's a lot of properties. If you look at Nason Street across from the library, those properties there are zoned business, not residential. And so it just makes it very easy for people to get very concerned and vote something that ought to be passed, vote something down because of fear. And if you sit there and say, okay, here's where these zones are, and therefore where they're not, then I think it makes it easier for people to feel
Yeah.
a little bit more assured. I think the other thing that's happened is we've also, approved marijuana establishments, which, I mean, frankly, if you're okay with marijuana, then you ought to be okay with body art, the personal
Yeah.
opinion.
And I will point out, we're not changing it from a no to a yes in the business districts. It's just changing from a planning board special permit to a by right. So, but we haven't had any. I don't
I
know
think
when the
that's
last
going to be a
time.
question, right? Has there been, this is what people usually ask, have
The
we
answer is
been,
no.
asked by a body art establishment to do this?
Yeah.
And
no.
the answer is no, this is just
This is
bringing us
just,
up. Yeah,
this
okay.
is just planning board effort to clean up
Right.
and modernize our zoning.
Absolutely.
Though, like, to be fair, Lana, looking at the language, like the language in the zoning laws is like body art is not welcome here.
Well, we're
It's
getting,
kind of
yeah,
it's
let's
kind of
move
like
on.
the
We'll
message.
let's look
Steve
at draft
said.
control D here, I think, which is part of that.
Right. So this is the body of the language. We're just removing it all because this was basic. The way zoning works is that we set criteria or standards in this case, so that applicants know what to expect, and the town has designed control over the activity. We're just getting rid of all that because that was for special permits, essentially. It's not needed. It's an allowed by right. And the other change, and I think it's part of this. If you could go up.
Yep. This one is.
So this is just
basically getting
removing
rid
all of it. Yeah.
Section 7.2.
So
Just removing that whole entry.
we do have I thought we had a statement here about.
Is it this one?
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
Yes,
yep.
yes, right. So this is section 11 now.
Okay,
We're just wordsmithing this a little bit. And we wanted to make sure that that last paragraph where we underline and call out Maynard Board of Health was clear, because we're basic, that's the permitting that's the permitting authority that
Right.
will allow this
right.
use to occur. So we just wanted to make it very clear that's the method for control.
Yes. Okay. So for the most part, what we're doing is switching this from a zoning control to a Board of Health, and also the larger, state, whatever, however they have to get certified and all those things. But switching it from a zoning control to a Board of Health control.
They're the entity that controls this activity from a use standpoint. They regulate, it's highly regulated. That's the means and methods of it. So that's all. That's the package of changes for body art.
So just to be clear, the Board of Health has certain regulations that it enforces on, that are health regulations. the planning board has a different set of requirements to decide whether establishments. So just to be clear, the zoning bylaws, which are passed by town meeting voters, okay? The
Mhm.
planning board then enforces those. Actually, I guess rules on those because they're enforced by other parties. And then makes recommendations to changes to town meeting voters. That's what they're doing here. So the planning board does not have a role in creating zoning in the sense that, it doesn't pass these things. It's got to be passed by town meeting voters. And that's all
Right.
they're doing here. So I'm just trying to clarify this because from our perspective, the planning board is making a recommendation to town meeting voters. All we should be doing is clarifying what that recommendation means from our perspective.
Are there any other questions for Chris on these body art changes? Okay. And then we have mixed use business. Let me pull this one up.
So this is a fun one.
Oh, great.
This is regarding what's called our downtown overlay district, which is essentially a district, as it sounds, that overlays a smaller area in the business district in the downtown. And it pretty much includes the triangle and heads a little bit towards the police station and town hall.
Mhm.
That downtown overlay district was set up, I think, 15 years ago or so. And the goal of it is to increase density in the downtown through a special permitting process by allowing smaller, dense units in buildings with store frontage, mixed use with store frontage on the ground level. That's the goal is to have a denser mixed use downtown. And that's what the downtown overlay district criteria promotes. So an applicant can come and choose to go through the downtown overlay district special permitting criteria process. And one of the criteria is that they're required to have what's called bonus units. Bonus units would be that they're allowed to have more units than what's typically allowed by right in that particular location. Meaning, so if I'll give an example, if a building were to go by right in the downtown, maybe they could have 20 sort of condo apartment units if they build, say, a 4-story riser. If they go through the downtown overlay district special permitting criteria, they could apply for bonus units, which we would allow them to have smaller sized units and they can get more of them, which is financially incentivized for the applicant. So there's a financial incentive there. And so they could potentially get maybe 25 units total. So there might be, say, 5 units that are bonus. Because those are bonus units, we demand that the special permit criteria states that those bonus units need to be, some percentage of them needs to be affordable based on the affordable, the AMI, which I think is here someplace. Anyway, so there's the AMI, the area median income, 80%.
Mhm.
And so that's been the special permit criteria for a while, I think, since this was set up as the DOD overlay district. What we're doing to help support for the housing crisis challenge is that we're asking to make this change would then allow even more affordable units to be considered as bonus units. So we would have a certain number of units that would qualify for the 80% AMI to be rented out as 80% AMI. And then we're looking to have some percentage of those be considered even 60% AMI. We do this because we want to do this because the 80% AMI number is pretty close at this point to the typical rents that is in Maynard already. our AMI for Maynard is regional, so it includes, you know, a calculation of all the other towns surrounding us in sort of a Metro West area. And so our 80% AMI number is very comparable to current market rates. So we're putting this in so that we can actually have real affordable units at 60% AMI. It's a small change. There's a lot of language here, but it's I think it's a step in the right direction. It's, you know, it's not going to fix the problem, but it's a step in the right direction to promote more housing, more affordable housing in the downtown overlay district area. So that was a lot said. Can I help clarify at all?
Well, I think it's great to clarify. So we're just getting rid of all, I'm just going through it a little bit and I'll go let people read your comments.
It was
comments, but
easier to replace the whole thing
Yes.
instead of
Yeah.
redlining it out because
That's-
there's too much.
that's often the case sometimes. I do like drawing attention to the fact that the AMI is a regional number, which means we are in there with not comparable, but just geographically close towns. And for us, that's a real disadvantage because, you know, that's comparing us with Concord and Sudbury and Acton and whatnot in terms of this AMI number. And so I think it's a really, I think it's a good step in the direction to have us have, yes, here's that 80% AMI number, but Maynard specifically could really use some lower than that as
Mhm.
well.
So the natural question is going to be, what's the downside of doing this?
Well, I can speak it maybe not in downside, but what could occur is that a applicant that would apply for, say, a 25 unit building, and say 4 of them, or let's say 5 of them were bonus units at 80% AMI. This would now make it so that there are, I think I would have to go back and look at the math in the chart. We went through this in detail to try to get the math right, but I think it would add two more units. We might get 7 total affordable units, and 2 of them would be at 60% AMI.
So what's the downside? If the town meeting voter says to you at town meeting, well, why wouldn't we want to do this? What's the problem in doing this? Is there a downside?
Well, I mean, so the way developers would do this is that they would build smaller units. So you would have, your housing stock would have smaller studio, you know, the smaller studio. So it might go from an 800 square foot studio to a 625 or 650 square foot studio. So
And
our
that's-
housing stock would
Yeah,
have some smaller units.
but
That
that's
Their
only in the-
revenue or profit would be, it wouldn't be smaller because they have more units, even though it's less
Mhm.
rent, they have more units producing that rent.
That's correct, yes. And so maybe a downside, Ken, is that if you considered a downside, there would be more people in the downtown, but I don't, you know, that's your perspective, whether that's a downside or not.
Yeah, I mean, that was part of the rationale for the downtown overlay district, which, as you explained in the beginning, was to increase density. And I think, you know, my answer would be, yeah, it creates smaller units, but it only creates it in one particular district. And it's the overlay district, which means that they have to go through special permitting anyway,
Mhm.
in order to get the downtown overlay district. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea. I also know you guys tend to, you know, discuss this pretty broadly on the planning board.
Mhm.
And so I was just wondering if there were any downsides that people, you know, that people brought up.
Maybe, I mean, more people uses more resources, so, but this is not a large change. I
Yeah,
look at this as more, I mean, you know, 5 years from now, we might get 4 or 5 more units out of the downtown because of this.
I mean, it's
Maybe-
probably,
maybe.
and they're probably going to be small units, which means they're not going to be units with, you know, with kids and stuff like
Right.
that, where, people are talking about the schools, but then again, schools need more kids anyway, as we have found out over the past years. So, all right, thank you.
Yeah. So again, I don't think it's not a big change. I
Mm.
look at this more as like also testing to see how this can work, because I want to understand how, if we pursue more 60% AMI projects and zoning in town, I want to see how this works. I want to see how it works from the developers in real time. We've spoken with developers, but I really want to see it play out. So
Mm.
I think it's a good test run.
So
Okay.
I do
Kevin, I
some,
see your hand
yeah.
up. Go ahead.
So following on Ken's point, is there a difference in the assessed value of a residential complex that's developed with the bonus unit? How's this value compare between just your vanilla residential complex versus one with these bonus units?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how the assessor's office would consider the difference. The square footage probably won't, if we're comparing apples to apples, the square footage of the building footprint wouldn't change. The height wouldn't change. There'd be more units, but I don't know how to, I don't
It
have the
would seem like,
information to answer that.
to Katie's point, it would seem like more smaller units would generate more income, make it more valuable. And so it might actually make the assessed value higher. But I think that's something that, the assessor would probably be able to tell us.
I mean, I think the impact is, I definitely am in favor of like, hey, let's try this out. And this is still has to go through planning board approval, correct, Chris?
Yes, so this is a very strict special permit criteria and process.
So we could just do like a pilot and like approve a smaller project at less risk, see how it goes. And then if it goes well, then we could probably open it up to more projects. So we don't have to like make a commitment like, oh yeah, like open just the floodgates and let every developer that wants to just go ahead and do this. We could be very selective and choose a like pilot low risk project to try it out.
We can't be selective. It depends
Yeah.
on what applicant comes to us. And so if they choose to use the special permit process, then that's the process they choose. We judge the project based on the criteria that's set. So we don't have a choice on which project that will apply for this. But there's not a huge number of properties that I think can be redeveloped in the downtown overlay district already. There's a limited number of properties.
Yeah.
Those,
Although it's interesting that we might onboard this at a time at which we are getting rid of the old fire station.
and that was on my mind
Mm.
as one location
Right.
that could be useful, because
Right.
maybe that's a resident, maybe that turns into residential property, but that to be determined.
And Chris,
Where are you gonna park all these people?
They come to the meetings, Ken, and we'll talk about parking for
Oh,
the special
Parking.
permit criteria.
Yeah. always gotta talk
You
about
do not
parking.
want me at planning board meetings.
You've been to planning board meetings before, Ken. It was
Yeah,
okay.
in fact, I was just looking back. I was on planning board when the body art stuff went through, so.
Full circle.
My
Yeah.
view of this is that, I mean, I don't think there's like huge impact from going this, but I think the interaction and the impact on our town finances is going to be a little complex. It's going to be like, okay, maybe this increases our water usage. Maybe it means less people utilizing the schools versus if it were like bigger units. But I think I think we should try it out, and I think we should go with it. And let's just experiment and see what the impact is. But I would note that like it is very difficult to see what the impact is going to be, but I do not believe the impact to be huge.
If I look back in time, the past decade, I think if we applied this to all the special permit projects that were done in the last decade, we probably would have maybe 10 extra units being built, maybe something on that order. So
right. We're not talking about hundreds of tiny studios.
Exactly. This isn't there's no possibility of there. I don't even think there's going to be a measurable financial impact to the town. Measurable. I don't think you can measure it. So.
Chris, how are we positioned with our affordable housing percentage and units? I know there's a certain amount that we are tasked with
Mhm.
having.
Yeah.
Are we in a good position there?
We're getting better over time. I think we're in the 9s, and so generally the goal is to get to 10 so that to use modern parlance, we don't get a hostile 40B, which means that we have control over development. So I think we're in the 9s right now. I think
Okay.
maybe the mid-9s. I forget the exact number. It's kind of a moving target because as soon as 115 Main, if it gets built, I think it will. If once those get commissioned, then that number increases. So,
Right.
we're getting better every year. My goal would be to do whatever I can to support getting to the 10% number
Okay.
as soon as possible. And this helps.
Does it change at all if we lower the threshold to this 60? Do we in any way get like bonus
No.
points for the? Okay.
No,
Just
no,
checking.
no, it's a good
Those can count as
question.
2.
I wish. I mean, they're actually affordable. So,
Yeah, right. Like,
yeah,
I mean, affordable
right.
at 80% of our AMI is like, okay.
Yeah. So
right.
no, we don't, unfortunately.
right.
But if a developer comes through and uses this, they will have more bonus units in total. So it does help the
Right.
total number of bonus units per project.
Okay. Any more questions for Chris on this draft control? And was that the 4 from planning board, or did I miss any? Do you have any more?
There's supposed to be one about accessory home-based business activities, which has been
Okay,
the
hold
most.
on. Let me just.
You know what? Because we haven't, tomorrow night, we're looking to close that hearing. And we haven't formally submitted it yet, but I can present on that one. And that's actually the one I was hoping to get some good
Okay.
feedback from everyone on.
So I wouldn't have it yet. It hasn't been.
No, we haven't approved it yet. And the reason
Okay.
we haven't approved it yet is because it's an important one. And I've been trying to get as much feedback as possible to improve the language as best we can.
Okay.
Would it be okay? I know we're.
Yeah.
getting
No, I
close to
think-
10.
I'd like to hear about it because
Because otherwise we're going to ask you back.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll share my
Can you
screen
share
if
the
that's okay.
screen?
Yep.
Yep.
And
You
I'll
should be able to.
I'll give a quick primer on this and then we can always talk more.
Sure.
Okay, so to start off, home occupation. This is in section 3.2 of accessory uses. So what you're seeing here, the red line that we have struck out, that's the current language that I was hoping to show you tonight. And I have a very short presentation that I can give to. This is regulating when a homeowner can use their property and an accessory use or an ancillary use. Think about it as moonlighting, or think about it as having a nail salon in your garage in the maze as a business occupation. It was written a while ago because if you read the language, you can kind of parse out how long ago it was written. There's some I'll save my opinions about the language itself, but it basically relies solely on the words any of the customary home occupations, which means that these typically are special permits that need to go to the zoning board of appeals, and when we have language that's very broad and not very definable as such as any customary home occupations, it makes it very difficult for the zoning board to actually have a criteria to judge whether something is customary or not. What's customary? Is having a bakery in your garage customary? Is a hair salon in your garage customary? Is artist woodworking customary? It's completely up to the individual board members. So we've been looking at this for a while, and the zoning board, we've been working on this for about 1.5 years. The zoning board came to the planning board and asked us to see what we can do. They've had many special permits since COVID began. And they simply don't have the guidance to help them make good decisions on this. And so I wanted to give you a sense of what the language was to begin with. So here's my presentation. So the idea here is that the town currently allows, many businesses by right or by special permit, and some, these ancillary uses, it would be through the zoning board of appeals process through a special permit. And Maynard, we consider Maynard to be a place where people do some small work out of their houses. And we think that's part of the culture and the nature and the history of Maynard. And so we want to support that. And we want to provide criteria for the zoning board to be able to make good decisions on this. So these things are typically have been called home occupations, trade shops, things like that. That's the old language that we're looking to move on from. Basically, the language is antiquated. That's the point of all this. The language is antiquated. We need new language. So the point is that this type of use would need to be incidental. It would need to be an accessory use. So it can't be the primary use in a residential home or in a residential neighborhood. It'd have to be a small incidental use. And so this is to help, people having a small business. Maybe there's a guy with a paint shop and he does a little bit of work in his garage, or there's an artist who does work in their garage or in their studio. And we want to be able to support this. This initiative doesn't affect real estate taxes. It does not address any business regulations or anything like that. This is just zoning for the home business uses in the home as an incidental use. I think I covered a lot of this already. Basically, it's, like I said, antiquated language. So the goal is to provide good guidance for the zoning board so they can make good decisions with really sound criteria. We want to be able to continue to support and promote residents in town using their properties in a way to provide supplemental income. We think that's a very good thing. We think that occurs a lot. And we want to promulgate that through the zoning. We also want to take the balanced approach, though, and protect characteristics of neighborhood. So, and this is why it's been so hard. We've been trying to find that balancing act where we are supporting a residential neighborhood and the characteristic of a residential neighborhood while also allowing incidental use on the property. I also see this, and I went to the EDC Economic Development Committee to get their feedback on this as well. I see this as sort of a conveyor belt to help small businesses incubate in their own sort of personal spaces and maybe grow into the town a downtown storefront later on. So I see this as having a conveyor belt of financial incentive to help support downtown businesses growing. So the way we're looking at this is to set up what we're calling a type A and a type B. Basically, type A would be essentially an allowed use. It means that there's no evidence that any type of activity is really occurring on the property. There's no mitigation necessary. There's no impacts. We don't need to have a special permit that regulates that type of activity. That could be an architect doing desk work in his house, or someone working remotely from home, in their study area or something like that. So we don't need to know, we don't need to regulate those activities. Nothing, there's no disturbances, there's no impact. The second one, type B, is when we would notice that there might be some impact occurring, and then that would trigger the special permit criteria process. And so the types of things we'd be looking at are pretty straightforward and standard. Noise, traffic lights, things of that nature. And it would be through a special permit process. I can get to we can cover these later if you want, but and I'm cognizant of time. I wanted to show, sorry for all my tabs being open. Here is the new language that we're looking to set. It has a purpose and an introduction. It has the application, which would talk about the type A and the type B. It gives some additional sort of guidance on what's not considered part of this, such as telework and working from home and things of that nature. Children's lemonade stands, that's not what we're talking about here. So then this is very basic zoning stuff. There's,
Don't laugh about lemonade stands.
being special permitted.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not special permitting lemonade
Yeah.
stands. Those are by right, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, some people didn't agree with that, but
No, it's not part of this. So there's general provisions, which is very standard zoning stuff, where we just discuss the types of things that we're looking to consider or regulate. We have we just get into more details about what type A is and what's allowed, and some criteria around that. So there's guidance. We want guidance on what type A is, so the zoning board can make a very easy decision. Same thing with type B. We get into the details of what a type B special permit would look like. And the crux of this, and the thing that we spend a lot of time on, is the special permit criteria for type B for this type of activity. And specifically, we have a list here. And this is the important part. Each of the listed characteristics applicable to the proposed bylaw must be approved individually. If a characteristic A through N is not specifically approved, it is not allowed. And I'm still working with Bill to see if we can improve this particular sentence. Technically, it's exactly where we want it, but it causes a lot of confusion. What we want it to, what it's intended to say, and what technically it does say, is that these items A through N need to be considered as part of the special permit, and they need to be considered individually. So it just it takes the zoning board so that they look at this criteria and go, are these things happening? Instead of taking a general perspective on, is this impact too much? So it's just really focusing in on what do we actually care about? And the reason we want to focus in on that is because if you have a larger conversation of, is this activity too much? It's very much based on perspectives, and those perspectives can change very differently between two people. And so A through N has a number of criteria. For example, one or more non-resident employees working at the premise at any one time. That's another easy one. Use of total of one on-street parking space by customers or clients. The consideration of heavy construction equipment on the property, noise, vibration, glares, fumes, odors, stuff like that. So this is the criteria for how the zoning board will judge a special permit. And that's very similar to how all special permits are done, where there's criteria being presented that then the entity itself, the permitting entity, then judges based on that. So that's the short version of this, unfortunately.
Is the zoning board of appeals still the special permit granting authority?
For this, the vast majority is yes. Bill Nemser keeps telling me that there's a scenario or two where they might need to come to planning board. But I still don't know what he does. I haven't gotten a good answer on why I would ever come to planning board. So,
yeah.
But yes, the answer is this is a zoning board.
Yeah.
Special permit.
This is just giving them more. Yeah, I see this as being a really good thing. I mean, I even remember this being a problem when I was on planning board. As you say, there was not a good definition. And I can only imagine that COVID exacerbated this, 10 or 20 fold. So I think you guys did a great job on this. There's still time, and I'm looking to, as you can see, that had a couple red lines in it. We're still tomorrow night, we're spending another chunk of time to see how we can improve this even further. I think it's already above the bar where I think it's appropriate to bring the town meeting, but I want to get it as good as possible. Again, I'll just go back to the current language, and I'll show that
there is no criteria here at all. And so
Right.
this is bad. This is real bad zoning, and it needs to be changed.
And I think it's really great that right off the bat, you know, it's very easy to say, oh, okay, if I work from home and my office job that, you know, maybe my office closed after COVID and now I work from home full time, which I know many people are now doing, that this is not, you know, this isn't about that, that you're fine. You can keep doing that. Absolutely. You know, we're not asking for special permits for everyone who's working from home.
That's
And
exactly
an office
correct.
job.
And what we actually take it one step further. We're promulgating that in,
Mhm.
we're codifying that. We're
Right.
saying telework, working from home activities are allowed,
Right.
which is, I think, an important, you know, no one, I don't think anyone really thinks they need to say that, but Maynard now, once this passes, will have the allowance of work from home.
Right. No, I mean, when this first, I remember talking briefly about this as you guys were working on it early on and thinking, are they trying to put in the need for a permit for someone who works from home? Like that was my
Yeah.
first question, like,
Right.
what? And I, you know, so I think that this is great to put it as an accepted use because as you say before, there was no language for this. And if you were to be in a situation perhaps with, I don't know, a contentious neighbor or something, and they were like, you need a special permit because you now are working from home all day or something.
Mhm.
They might have had a leg to stand on with that, you know, and
Right.
at this, and with this now it's much more clear that is, you know, an absolutely accepted use of residential space.
What if my job is to work in an explosives factory and I'm doing work at home? No, I'm serious. I'm serious. So this basically says I can perform work for the business in my own residence.
Yeah. It doesn't mean you're not regulated
Research.
by
I mean, you
other.
wouldn't have like a lab in your house that you're blowing things up, right? I mean,
Well, if that's the work I do,
I
Well,
think that
but
goes
hold on.
under,
But I think you would be regulated under code
you'd be
enforcement.
regulated
right?
under smells, and there were
not
some other
unless something
things.
blew up.
Yeah, we're not addressing that scenario, Ken.
No, I understand that, but you know,
Yeah.
it's a ridiculous example, but this is the kind of example that people bring up. And, you know, to say, well, you know, there's code enforcement that, you know, so the health, you know, the
You're not allowed to
bodyguard-
have, you're not allowed to have explosive chemicals in your residential property, you know, like, you know, all that's regulated. But yeah, you're right. We're anticipating this. That's why I didn't cover it. But we do have a number of frequently asked questions that we keep getting, that I'm planning to discuss during my presentation, during town hall. So sorry to cut you off, Ken, but I think I totally agree with you. And we're anticipating some weird, you know, questions from left field on this.
I think the answer to Ken's question is that like there are definitely the Department of Transportation regulations on transport of explosives. And if you're getting delivery
go.
of materials except by mail carrier, which can't carry explosives, then I think they'd be able to get that business, you know, under regulation by the fact they're taking delivery by a special vehicle.
Yeah, I think this is one of those situations where Rick Asman is going to have to be there to answer those kind of questions, because to be able to say, well, I think, just invites more scrutiny. You've got to sit there and say, here's the definitive answer.
Yeah, and you know, the more common question we get that's similar to that is, well, why don't you have noise controls built into this? Why don't you have language that stipulates the noise requirements at the edge of a property? And that's the answer to that question is because that's code enforcement.
Yeah,
And if so, you can't, it's inappropriate to put code enforcement
right.
into, can you get this? But in you can't put code enforcement. It's completely inappropriate to put code enforcement into the zoning bylaws. Code enforcement needs to be under the town bylaws. And, if people are really interested in having a noise ordinance in the town bylaws for code enforcement, then you need a citizens group and they need to bring that forward and bring that to town meeting sometime. But until then,
Okay.
we're like most towns. Most towns in Massachusetts don't have noise ordinances. They rely on the Commonwealth guidance. And that's what Maynard defers back to.
But there was language about noise, smells, some other things in here.
Yep, we talk
Right.
about it being excessive. So we can look at that if it helps.
I'm just wondering so you're saying that you can't have code enforcement in the planning, in the zoning,
Mhm.
but you do mention it.
We mention it as a criteria for consideration.
So that would
Okay.
trigger the type B type of business, not the type A.
Yes, so if there's noise that is beyond the property line, that's why a special permit is be needed, and the zoning board would need to decide if that noise is reasonable or not.
And certainly a bylaw about it would enforce, or that would be something they would have to look at in this, when they're deliberating. Like, is that against a bylaw or not?
Yeah, so I don't think I don't think of the zoning board or the planning board or any entities like that would issue a special permit that goes against code. Unless
Right.
there's stated reason to do so for, I don't know, I'm sure there's examples of this, but so Maynard doesn't have a noise ordinance.
Right.
So ours defaults to the state levels, which is a state guidance. But from a zoning standpoint, we're saying that this needs to be considered as part of the criteria for whether a special permit should be issued or not.
Well, and to Katie's point, whether it's a type A or type B, so, and so that type B invites added scrutiny.
Yep.
Alana, all Chris was saying is you would not put in specific noise levels because that is, that's either in state law or
Mhm.
local code. And so therefore that automatically is involved.
Okay.
The noise is going to be the tricky thing. It's the question we get the most about.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And to be honest, there's no good answer besides if people are really interested in controlling noise, the answer is to have a noise ordinance in the town bylaws. That's the answer, not in zoning, but in the town bylaws. And that's the best I can give you.
Well, so the problem is you could imagine a situation where you have somebody who is is a carpenter and uses saws and stuff like that could be could get very noisy.
Mhm.
And this is in a residential neighborhood, and so that's and you could imagine light also being an issue, I guess,
Mm.
if
Yeah, depending on hours, especially. Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and then it'll be up to the zoning board to decide what is too much noise. If someone's running a table saw all day long, I think they would say that's not an incidental use anymore. It seems you're doing a full-time job running a table saw company, out of your
Yeah.
property. That's not incidental. You do not
No.
qualify for a special permit. So
Yeah.
that's how the conversation would probably go.
This is nicely done. So when are you having this presentation? 'Cause this is at town meeting?
Yes, so this presentation, you'll see a different version of this. I'm gonna spend more time on it. But I plan to give a presentation during town meeting.
Yeah.
Regarding all the zoning changes, but it'll primarily be focused on this one.
Nicely done. Nicely done.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think it's great.
It's a tough one, but
Yeah,
you know, like I said, I look at it as tension. Like we have protect the neighborhood and allow, people to make incidental income. And those two tension points are real. And I think that's a good thing. And what we've been trying to do is find that middle point where we're between the 2 points. And I think we've done a good job at that, but we'll find out.
Now, question, how would this trigger people who are already operating out of their home with their business? Would it be a complaint by a neighbor to this? Is this just for new people coming in, or how would that trigger people who are already doing it?
It would be for any activity. So if someone has, let's say there's an artist that, I don't know, maybe, I don't know a good example. Maybe there is a woodworker that runs a table saw a couple times a day. They should go through this process. But yes, so I think to your point, Katie, I think in practicality, the trigger point would be a complaint.
Right, because they're probably not going to come to you and say, "Hey, I think I might need a permit."
So
probably, yeah.
I agree, but what I tell people that are hesitant, that do some of this work already and are hesitant about getting a permit, I tell them a permit protects you. Like once you have that special permit and you follow the criteria, building commissioner is not going to, not going to make a judgment over that overrules that special criteria. That's
right.
That permit.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
It's a piece of protection for small ancillary sort of shops. So I think it supports. The goal again is to support these activities while also having a balanced approach to protect the status of a residential neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Completely
absolutely.
agree. Nice
So,
point. Good point.
That's the big one for me. But thank you guys for your time tonight. I know it was late.
yeah, thank
Really,
you.
really appreciate it.
Thank you for your work on
Yeah,
this.
thank you, Chris.
We'll see if, as you say, you're still working on it and you're hoping to get it at ATM, but we'll see.
And for a primer, I think the next zoning next zoning we're going to tackle is accessory dwelling units.
Ooh.
Oh, like
Yeah.
in-law apartment situations.
Yeah, I don't know what it's going to look like yet.
Okay.
I'm going to slow walk that and get a lot of good feedback before we really approach it. But I think we've spent 1.5 years on this. I really hope this gets passed, and I would really love to tackle accessory dwelling units.
If you talk to real estate agents, they're a huge selling point. It's definitely a thing that a lot of families are looking for. And so I think it's important to be proactive about it. Yeah.
And I think it meets a lot of the master plan goals. So anyway, that's just a preview of what the board may tackle at some point in the future.
Awesome.
Okay.
So, thanks again.
Well, thank you so much.
Of course. You guys are
for
the best.
being here tonight. We appreciate it. All right.
We're
So
starting to get into overtime pay territory here.
yeah,
Madam
we
Chair.
definitely are. So not going to go through any other articles tonight. I did put a couple more up on board docs. You've seen them all. You've been forwarded them all. Just know that we're really getting into ATM prep and reviewing these and voting on them. So that will be forthcoming. And if we could really quickly just grab the minutes from our
And I asked Alana about it. I have not typed up yet the minutes from the tri-board meeting. So I will get that to everyone prior to next meeting.
Totally fine. We will do that next meeting. But let me just bring up the ones from 2/6. And we can go through those real quickly.
I don't know if I got Khadijah's last name. Brown.
There you go.
Not Brown. Thank you.
So if there's any discussion or corrections, or we can entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. We accept the minutes from February 6th.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, then we will do a roll call vote. Kevin,
Yes.
Ken,
Yep.
Katie,
Yes.
Jillian,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. Thank you so much for those, Katie.
Alana, quick question. We approved a reserve transfer tonight, so that would show up on our dollar amounts on the next minutes, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
awesome.
And all right, so again, it's really late, so I don't want to go too long on chair and member updates. I did just want to let everyone know, I believe there is going to be a tri-board meeting scheduled, so for some discussion happening on that soon, in the hopes of getting the 3 boards together again for some discussion on budget and things of that nature. So I will keep you informed from what I hear on that. And other than that, I think that was the only super pressing thing. Does anyone have updates that you would like to share this evening?
Just on the item of the CPC. So we did receive some items that the CPC intends to pursue at town meeting for town meeting approval.
Oh, yes. Mhm.
I know we had Justin just in, but we didn't get to discussing those CPC items. The reason I
right.
bring it up is because Justin has concerns that DPW will not be able to support the maintenance of some of those items, and that was discussed repeatedly at the CPC meetings.
Okay.
So I don't think we have to have Justin come in just to discuss those, but if we could have like an email discussion of, hey, what's going on, and then we could talk about
I'll
that.
s-
And
Can you
And I
give an
will-
Can you give an example, Kevin, what his concern was?
that he doesn't have the budget to provide maintenance for some of these items, like with Marble Farm, for example.
Yeah, I know he'd already talked about Marble Farm.
Yeah.
Was there another one?
Maybe the new playground
I believe it
or
was
the redone playground at Rio?
Yeah, I was.
Okay, that's right. That's right.
Yep.
Okay.
That would be
all
my
right.
guess.
Thanks. I was just, I think Kevin's absolutely right. We, these longer term impacts need to be taken a look at. So
Mhm.
that'd be great.
I
I'll ping
mean,
Justin on that.
yeah, I mean, we should definitely talk about it as a finance committee, because I have certain views of
Okay.
what would be financially optimal in this case, even if we're not necessarily doing the most maintenance on them.
Okay.
as we
I
could.
have asked for a CPC representative to come and
Yep.
talk with us about their articles this year as well.
But I think what we have, I think the one thing is when we have that CPC discussion, I would like to have that list from Justin of items on that CPC that DPW cannot support on their
Okay.
current budget.
Got
And
it.
then we could cross-reference and ask about it and, be like, hey, we're going to build this new playground, but we can't maintain it. So
Right.
what's the plan? Are we just going to be building new playgrounds every time, at shorter intervals than we otherwise could?
Right. All right. Sounds good. And our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, March 13th. We are going to have a budget discussion with the Maynard Fire Chief, a town charter articles discussion with Bill Coleman, the Charter Review Committee Chair. And we will start going through these ATM articles at that time as well, because we have March 13th, March 27th, and then April 10th, and our recommendations, I believe, are due on the 11th. So it's a little tight. We will see how we do. We may
Alana,
have
what week
more.
is April break? Is that prior
That's the
to?
following week. That's the
Okay.
17th.
Awesome.
So just to let you know, at the next meeting, I'm gonna have to leave at about 9 o'clock to go pick Lindy up at the airport, so.
Okay.
If there's any voting to
Okay.
be done, I'll have to be doing it by phone.
Okay. All right. I think that is it for tonight. Thank you for hanging in there. Sorry it was such a jam-packed meeting, and hopefully we can get out a little bit earlier next time, but no promises. It's a little busy right now, guys. So thank
Are
you.
you
I
look-
do appreciate it.
Are you looking for a motion?
Yes, I
I
will
make a
entertain
motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All right, all those in favor, take a wave and a goodbye. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here so late. We appreciate it. Have a
Good
good
night.
evening.
Good night,
Night.
everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Night, Natasha.